This is the D6 generation with your hosts, Craig Gallant.
No, cut that. Keep that. Someday it's going to be worth something.
Russ Wakelin.
You put me in an ATST with frickin' Wookiees attacking me and whatnot?
Now you're talking. And Rick Priestley in the third chair.
I'm just fine, thank you very much.
With contributions from Total Fangirl
Vampires do not sparkle.
and our loyal listeners.
Are you crazy? That's like 400 hours of gamer nonsense.
Welcome to another edition of Rapid Fire, the roundtable discussion of all things gaming, coming to the speed of a Mogris mounted upon a meld shark, making a savage strike. Today's edition is brought to you by all of our fine friends over at Patreon, the ladies and gentlemen who help us keep the lights on. This time around, we'd like to mention Darius, Messarius, Mercarius, I don't even know, Kirk Klopfenstein, Steen, I don't know, Jamie Searle and Benjamin, this was a lot of really rough ones, Marshall Osk, I don't know. I'm Giggly McNary, your host. Today our panelists are Russ Freeborn Vardossi Vakelin and the godfather of sci-fi wargaming himself, Rick Algarin Prosperate Priestley. Let's begin. Issue number 1. Central to the lore of Beyond the Gates of Antares is the red supergiant star known to astronomers as Antares. It is the 15th brightest star in the night sky of Earth and one of the 4 brightest stars near the ecliptic. Question. Antares is also the brightest star in its own constellation, one of the 12 zodiac signs. As such, it goes by another far more dramatic name, the heart of what zodiac animal? Rampant Aries Russ.
I'm going to go with Leo.
Raging Taurus Rick.
Leo, that's ridiculous. Scorpio.
Ah, darn.
And that means that Russ is wrong! And Rick goes ning, 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 ning with his first score of the day. The heart of the scorpion, of course, the constellation Scorpius. Ah, the benefits of a classical education. Issue number 2. One of the most important elements of modern and one can assume near future and even far future warfare is the need to suppress enemy infantry that cannot be directly eliminated for a variety of different reasons. War games that take this reality into consideration often include rules for suppression fire or pinning of enemy units, degrading their performance and their ability to act in subsequent game rounds. Question. Using current Western military doctrine, what is the suppressive corridor of a single rifle or machine gun round during a close firefight? Russian RPK Russ.
200 yards.
Rheinmetall RMG Rick.
Oh, about 14 qubits.
And I'm realizing I've already asked this question once before. Shame on Russ. You're both wrong. According to all of my Wikipedia sources, that would be 1 meter to either side. Now, since the majority of us are in America, I'm only going to accept that in U.S. customary systems, so 1.093613 yards, or 3.28084 feet, or 39.3701 inches, neither of which any of you said. Issue number 3. Anticipation or being enthusiastic is an emotion involving pleasure, excitement, and sometimes anxiety in considering some expected or longed for good event. Built into the frisson of anticipation is the fear that your expectations may not be entirely met or perhaps crushed altogether. And of course, the more momentous the anticipated event, the more our anticipation grows. Question. On a scale of 1 through 10, with 1 being the annual soybean crop reports in September and 10 being the fulfillment of all your hopes and dreams, what is the median level of anticipation for gamers across the globe for Star Wars Episode 7 The Force Awakens, now only 4 days away as we record? Rappertoonie Russ.
20.8.
Marka Ragnos Rick.
About 14 million billion zillion.
Actually, continuing the string of broken records the movie is leaving behind in its wake, the median anticipation level for gamers has broken math, opening the syntax of quanta to the merciless void and reduced the algorithmic data points to ad infinitum, returning the answer one small Indian elephant and the Argentinian Navy on maneuvers. Issue number 4. In general relativity, an event horizon is a boundary in space-time beyond which events cannot affect an outside observer. In layman's terms, it is defined as the point of no return, i.e. the point at which the gravitational pull becomes so great as to make an escape impossible. Question. Although it sounds really cool, the concept of an event horizon encompasses an idea that reaches all the way from the mundane into the truly terrifyingly epic. When general relativity and quantum mechanics are both applied to an event horizon, what does the event horizon gain? Hubert Reeves Russ.
It becomes a black hole.
Mark Reason Rick.
Yeah, about 14 pints of ale, I think.
Yeah, that is close. We would accept that because of your esteemed nature. So Russ is wrong. Actually, the answer is temperature. Now, the real question, is it hot or cold? That quacky quantum. That's it for now. Thanks for listening and good night.
This episode of the D6 Generation is brought to you by Lone Wolf Development. Take your game to the next level.
And by Geek Nation Tours. Rise up and join the Geek Nation, touring the world at geeknationtours.com.
And by Audible. Try the service, get a free book, and support the show. All by visiting audibletrial.com/D6G. Hello!
Hello.
Hello, I'm Rick Priestley.
Hey! And welcome to episode 180, and we are so excited.
To the Granger Point.
We're so excited to have Rick Priestley on the show today. I am Russ Wakelin.
I am Craig Gallant, and as you already heard,
We've got Rick with us today.
I still am me.
He is. Rick.
he
sorry.
remains Rick Priestley.
I remain Rick Priestley despite everything.
Exactly. I am having trouble containing myself, Craig, because
As am I.
And Rick, thank you so much for returning to the show. Clearly, we didn't screw up too much last time, as you have returned. Although
I have returned.
It took 2 years for us to
I am
forget what
wearing my
happened.
special underpants this time.
Excellent. Well played,
good.
sir. Excellent. So as longtime listeners will know, we pretty much grew up playing Rick's games. So to have him here on the show today is fantastic, and we're really excited. Craig, go ahead.
I would say, Rick, that you are probably in maybe the top 4 or 5 people in the entire world who have given me as much enjoyment as the others in that group. Sorry, my grammar just completely collapsed. But seriously,
You must have led a very sheltered life.
well, that is true. That is true as well.
Can't argue that. So we're happy to have Rick here on the show. We are going to talk with him in detail about Beyond the Gates of Antares and how it came to be. And then later, Craig and I will go into a very detailed review of the game as well and our findings after playing more than a few battles. So we'll let you guys know how that went as well.
Yes, you may have remembered in recent episodes that we've been playing it, and you might make certain assumptions based on the fact that we've been playing it a lot.
So before we get to all that excitement, Craig, we do have a few bits of bookkeeping here we should do.
Little bookkeeping.
Just a little bit. So all the contests are wrapped up for the holidays. We'll see you again for more contests in 2016.
Yep.
But Craig, you and I did get a chance to sit at Dunkin' Donuts briefly and chat about things. Do you remember what we chatted about there?
We did. Well, we chatted about what everybody is chatting about, Russ, and that would be Star Wars in the upcoming, or now that when you're listening to this, the recently released Force Awakens.
All the amping up and excitement towards the big Star Wars film. Hopefully it was as good. We're recording this literally 2 days before Star Wars is released. The Force Awakens comes out.
Well, a lot of our friends are going tomorrow, so
they are.
Less than 24 hours from now, most of our friends will be in fact seeing the movie as we record 24 hours from
So
now.
if you want to hear our thoughts about the hype, you want to tune into the Lost Chapters. And Craig, now what is the best way people can listen to the Lost Chapters?
The best way to listen to the Lost Chapters, Russ, is to become a Patreon patron of the D6 Generation. And what that means is that you pledge a little support to the show, and every episode you kick in a little bit. Could be 50 cents, could be $5, could be $10. There's a few guys even at $20. At $2 a show, however, that unlocks every Lost Chapter that we've ever put out there, and so you can, and it's all at once. You don't pay by the thing or anything. As soon as you are a $2 Patreon supporter, you get access to all of that extra content. Following, of course, it's really the way you can tell that we're greedy, money grubbing people is that we do the 4-hour show for free, and then we get you for the extra half hour.
That's right. So you can check all that out.
Sort of
over
the
on Patreon.
opposite of the drug dealer thing.
Yeah, the easiest way is go to Patreon or go to our website and click on the big pile of books on the right-hand side there.
Yep, absolutely. And, of course, now with the Patreon app,
it's even easier, yes.
you can listen right on your phone.
It surely is. So that works great.
Easy,
so
more
excited.
easily.
Exactly, very simply. Now, also, of course, the D6 Generation brushes from our friends at Games and Gear, those brush sets, they are going fast,
yes.
Craig.
They are. It's been a great season. They've been burning up the airwaves, and when you listen to this, it's too late to get them. Actually, Christmas is probably gone by the time you listen.
Very
to
close
this.
to it, yes.
But there's still, as of right now, there's still some sets left. So if you feel like you didn't get a chance and you waited to the last minute, or hey, well, how about some of that holiday cash burning a hole in your pocket?
That's right.
Check out Games and Gears and look at those brushes, because they are super high quality. They are what I'm doing. I'm doing my painting. I just got a new set of the Kolinsky brushes, and that's what I'm doing all my painting on. And we'll talk about that and a little bit more in achievements.
That's right. You've set that New Year's resolution to paint more of those models that are sitting there on your shelf. Why not kick it off right and get excited with a brand new set of brushes? That's what I say.
Yep,
So
absolutely. That is what I say too.
So, Craig, what's the time now for?
Well, why don't we make it time for
Achievements in Gaming.
So, Rick, what have you been playing lately for games? Beyond the Gates of Antares. See what I did there?
Ooh, see what you did there.
Ooh, beyond Gates. Yes.
Right.
I know. I'm confused already. I think the last game I played was an American Civil War, a historical game, actually, around at the Perry Twins. Using, and it wasn't even, because, we have a black powder system at Warlord. It wasn't even that. It was a new game called Pickett's Charge, which is written by David Brown, author of General de Brigade. And I really enjoyed it. Got beat as usual. got mildly thrashed as I wish. I tend to gives me confidence in a set of rules. That does.
Nice. So Rick,
there's something about the world being level and even.
If you lose badly,
yes, you've got it in one there. I think before that, the last game I played before that was Hail Caesar against Nigel Stillman. Mm-hmm. We had a bit of a bash with his new late Bronze Age supplement for Hail Caesar. I can't remember how I did in that. I think it was an honourable draw. Yeah. So still some work to do on that one, obviously.
Clearly. Right. And any rule set that does not properly measure your tactical prowess, it needs to be rethought, right?
Well, I tend to think if I can win, then, it needs some work.
Right. I love it. Now, Rick, do you mostly play miniature games, or do you ever dabble in the board game realm or other gaming realms?
Almost not at all these days. I used to play board games quite a lot. And, every Christmas, my wife and I buy a board game and often we have friends around and play. And then we started to keep cats, and what we found was that the cats would make board game playing almost impossible. And after the terrible year in which we got the Reiner Knizia Lord of the Rings game and Frodo disappeared under the sofa with one, never to return again, we decided it wasn't worth the trouble. So not very often these days.
Oh, dear.
Although I'm actually still working on some board games. There's a bit of a laugh. I've got a dungeon crawl game which I've been working on for about 15 years, as far as I know. These things never get finished.
Right, one of those side projects. Excellent.
Wow. Yeah. I forget. I'm only now remembering from the last time we had you on, Rick, how exciting it is to hear you talk about your gaming, because it's like a who's who of gaming luminaries in England. So I played this game with this guy who's really important, and it's I
can't get away from
it'll shivvy. They won't leave you alone.
Yes, because I'm stalking them.
So great. So Craig, what have you been playing lately?
Well, I don't want to seem like a suck up, but I have been playing Beyond the Gates of Antares with you, Russ.
Indeed. Now, since due to eddies in the space-time continuum and how we have to record these shows,
far worse eddies than normal.
Yes,
we might add.
Within the time stream here, within the holiday season, we haven't had as much really time between episodes as we normally get. So the achievements this time are a little smaller, but yes, Craig and I have been playing a lot of Antares, and just had another fantastic game. We'll talk more about that later in this episode.
Yep, I sat in on a Guild Ball game. That game is still awesome.
Yeah, good. I want to play more of that.
What's that?
I got to play more of that. I got my guys.
What team did you get? I forget.
I have the Alchemists.
You get the Alchemists,
yes.
Right? I watched the Brewers versus the Masons last night. I'm not the Brewers, the Butchers. It was brutal. I forgot that you get points for knocking people out of the game. And I kept wondering, why is Matt turning those dice every time he knocks one of Dave's guys out? Game was over in about 35 minutes, which is ridiculous for a Guild Ball game. And I was like, wow, Dave's the only one who scored. He's doing great. Yeah, he got crushed. But it was fun. And then played another X-Wing co-op mission. This time we played Rescue Rebel the Operatives. And it was interesting because the way the mission deck works, you've got those 5 cards and they all start with starter missions. And then when you accomplish one starter mission, that card goes away and the next card in that plot line gets in. So right now we have, I think we have 2 cards that are like the final card. So actually victory point missions in there that are going to be really hard. We have 2 middling missions, and then now we do. We had 1 middling mission, and we had 2 starter missions still that we had somehow avoided. So for the first time in probably a couple of months, we went and we pulled both of the starter missions. So we had to do a new starter mission, and it was really, really easy. It was very odd.
Oh, okay.
But it was fun. It was the Hawk model, which I only just got from the War Store.
Mm-hmm.
It features prominently at one point or another in almost every one of the plot lines of the heroes of the Artillery cluster.
Right.
And last night we didn't have it. Of course, I have it and didn't put it in my case. And I just transferred all my stuff to cool new battle foam and forgot to transfer the Hawk. So it was a Y-wing making the escape, but
awkward.
I just had to cross the board and it was interesting, but it was fun. Still a blast. Still a great way to play that game. Loving it. Russ, what about you? What have you been playing?
Well, as I said, it hasn't been a lot due to the time stream, but did get some Antares in with Craig, but also finally got Undercity to the table. So this is the co-op.
Really?
Speaking of co-ops, this is the dungeon crawl, if you will. It's actually city crawl co-op from Privateer Press, featuring the War Machine models and Hordes models. And so my daughter Rose and I tried it out. And we had a great time with it. We really enjoyed it. We played the first scenario. We were victorious, so that's good news. But she really enjoyed it as well. And we recorded, and it's got a full campaign mode where your characters all level up and you collect experience points. And there's definitely an element to it where you could easily end the game early, but you'll get less XP. So it's kind of like that Descent situation where you want to grab all the chests, but do you really want to grab all the chests? And we almost lost it doing that. But we did. We made it through. So yeah.
Now, who did you play with?
Just my daughter Rose. Just Rose and I.
Very
2
nice.
players. It was fun. Now this is a pure co-op. So it's though it's a dungeon crawl.
Right.
There's no Overlord character.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that. Great. So that's that. What about modeling? Rick, what have you been doing for modeling?
Do you know, all the time, because Antares has been quite a lot of actual work, which I don't approve of on the whole, but, one has no choice. I've not had so much chance to do painting or modelling as I normally do. But having said that, I've got some more Boromites on my table at the moment and some Concord plastics, which I'm really enjoying putting together and painting.
As am I.
Yeah, they're good, aren't they?
Oh, I'm really enjoying them.
And they're much more posable than you think.
Yes.
The combinations of, even though they're not terribly multi-part, they're relatively few parts, they are quite posable and convertible too. A little bit of hacking.
Oh yes.
Yeah, and so that's all good fun. I've also got some Russian World War II for my bolt action, and they're next up.
Very nice. Craig, what about you, sir, for modeling?
I have been working on, so Russ and I each got the Beyond the Gates of Antares starter, and we swapped the models. So we each have double the models for our chosen faction. And so I have just started my second box content. So I put together 20 more C3 troopers and 4 more drones, and I actually had already done all of the little buddy drones, so that was it. And then I actually have some characters. The starter box comes with one Panhuman Concord character, so I'm painting him up, and I actually got the Hansa Nairoba, who is kind of he's like your tutor when you go through the rule book. There's little pictures of him laughing at you in little box out sections through the whole thing. I thought he was a mercenary that anybody could take, and it would be cool to have him because he's in the rule book. Turns out he's not. He's actually a freeborn character, so I might have to get a freeborn army.
There you go.
And then everybody sees, like you see online, where people use aquarium plants to do alien plants for sci-fi gaming, and I've never done that. I thought it always looked cheesy, but I needed it. For some reason, because this is so non-gothic sci-fi, like I needed something new to kick my games up a notch with Beyond the Gates of Antares. So I went on Amazon Prime and I got 40 aquarium plants for a very reasonable price, shipped directly from China. And I mounted them all on some really cool laser cut template boards that I got from from Gordon's shop, the Adler Hobby.
Yep.
And I sanded it all and I painted it, and actually Russ and I played on it last night, and what I've actually done is we agreed that it looked a little plasticky still, so tonight I sprayed it with no shine varnish, and actually it looks really, really cool.
Oh, nice.
So that really kicked it up a notch. And it's intriguing because I used a trick that your brother John taught me back when we were making all the terrain at DACA, where instead of wasting your money on little GW paint pots to do all your painting with, you go to Home Depot with a little, like a little popsicle stick that you've painted using the color that you want, and they'll do a color match and get you a big latex collection I got a little sample. I actually got even smaller than that. I don't know what size it is, but you can get a little sample for when you're painting your house. And I got one of those, and it's like a miracle. I feel like I gone back in time. I have a giant pot of Goblin Green and a giant pot of the Bubonic Brown, which was kind of like my go-to highlight color for all my terrain. And I dry brushed everything, all the sand and everything. It looks great. It looks like I'm back in time. I feel like I'm back at DACA.
Oh, it's nice.
So I've got all kinds of cool alien jungly terrain.
Very cool.
Now, Russ, you've been kind of busy yourself with some Beyond the Gates of Antares models.
Indeed, I've got both the starter sets of Gar, which is a total of two. You get 6 squads, 6 guys. So 2 squads, 6 guys in a box. So I have 12, which doesn't sound like many, but the Gar are big. They're on large bases. They've got a lot of bits. Think about like the size of a 40K Terminator, roughly, that kind of situation. So a lot of parts. They feel
even a little bit bigger than that.
Yeah, a lot of detail. You can pose them a lot. I'm having a blast posing them. So I've got all 12 built and posed on bases, and they're all in very exotic poses. None of them are the same. I think only one guy is actually standing with all 3 feet flat on the ground. Everybody else is like crawling over some kind of curved surface or leaping off of a crystal or something. So one of them is completely, all of them are built, all of them are primed. One of them is completely done, one squad of 3. And then the second squad is about, now at this point, since we played Tuesday, about halfway done. So they'll be done this weekend. And then I'll have 2 squads to go. So I'm hopeful I'll get the whole thing done by New Year. That's my goal.
Oh, yes.
So I'm pretty excited about that.
I just picked up a bunch of other squads, too. So
well, that's the problem.
I will have a whole bunch of stuff hopefully done considerably before New Year would be my hope.
I'll be at a store that carries all the stuff, and I might end up buying more. I'll try to resist, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, no. You're going to buy more.
So that's modeling. What about other geeky goodness?
Rick, what do you do you watch any TV?
Yeah, but I don't watch a lot of modern TV, sci-fi and fantasy.
Yeah.
If I sit down and watch something on TV, it's often I just find something fairly light, just to relax with, like Big Bang Theory's on
very nice.
Just the latest season is on at the moment in England, so I'm just catching up on that. That's good fun. Yeah.
How about what are you reading now? You've got that big bookshelf behind you. What are you reading?
Oh, do you know? This is going to frighten you. I'm actually reading the second part of Roy Foster's biography of W.B. Yeats, which is a mammoth volume on
light
on
TV
Yeats.
Watching, not so much on the reading.
No, I've always had a bit of a thing about Yeats, and in fact, I've probably got more books on Yeats than I've got on the most public libraries have, in fact.
Wow.
That's
a
just
Renaissance man.
Yeah, well, it was just something I kind of grew up with at school, and then subsequently when I went to college and I studied English Lit as a sort of part of my degree, and got into terrible trouble with my tutors because it's very unfashionable to correlate a literary person, an artist, a poet, or a novelist. It's very unfashionable to correlate their work to their lives.
Oh, really?
You're supposed to. Yeah, you're supposed to
take them as 2 separate things.
Yeah. The work has to be judged in its own right, as if that was the 1960s and 70s doctrine that became, and probably is still the case, which became absolute. But I was always fascinated by the history. And Yates wrote at a time when when Ireland was in an extreme position, going from a part of the United Kingdom to being an independent country, and you have the nationalists and the growth of Sinn Féin and all that sort of thing. And you also have a guy who believed in magic, so he was also a member of the Golden Dawn, and a lot of this sort of thing actually got worked into 40k, and people don't necessarily realise. Yeah, because in reading about Yates, I came to read about the Golden Dawn and Aleister Crowley. He was a member of the Golden Dawn, the well-known Satanist, and that sort of thing. And so the guy's life and his work all come together. It's really quite interesting.
Wow!
There you go. Told you didn't want to ask.
No, I think it's excellent, and it ties right back into 40k, which is crazy.
Yeah, that's very cool.
It kind of does. Yeah.
Have you seen any movies lately, or are you looking forward to any particular movie?
Do you know, I can't think of anything that I'm looking forward to seeing. No, it's all a bit disappointing. The last movie I saw was The Martian.
Oh, what did you think?
What did you think of that?
I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really good movie.
As did I.
Had you read the novel?
No, I hadn't. So I went in.
There's a dearth of Yates in the novel, The Martian.
Yeah, there's not much Yates in there.
Well, I went with a friend who had read the novel, and she didn't say anything about the novel until after we'd seen the movie, and then she sort of pointed out where all the differences were, and how there's a lot more internal monologue in the book. Sure. But I thought it was interesting. Reminded me a bit of a book called Shipwreck by Charles Logan, which was quite a sort of famous book in its day, but its day was 50 years ago, which is kind of Robinson Crusoe in space, if you like, and except it's much more grim.
Oh, yeah.
In the Martian ends quite happily, whereas in Shipwreck by Charles Logan it doesn't. He just dies horribly.
Spoilers.
Yeah,
Book's been out for 50 years, though, folks. You've had your chance.
Good point.
If you've not read it, then you've not read it.
Right.
But it's an unusual book because it's entirely from one guy. It's got one person in it. The entire book with one character.
Wow.
Nice.
So there's no other characters. There's there's not even a kind of Man Friday.
Yeah, there's no Friday or anything. You got nothing to work with there.
Nope.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Nope, nothing. Just one guy and his experience all the way through the book.
Ooh, interesting. I kind of like those kind of books. I'm gonna have to check that out, even though I know the ending now. Rick, thank you. It sounds good.
I wonder if they made it into an audiobook, but that would probably end with you crying in the car somewhere and
yes,
people
it would.
around you misunderstanding.
Yes, it would. I only
He's a bit of a weepy.
It can happen. I'm not going to lie. These things do occur. I'm an emotional gentleman. It's okay for 2015.
It's okay. You're tied in with your emotions.
Right.
It's good. It's good. You're a man of the 2000s.
That's right.
Ish.
It's ish. Second decade, whatever we're calling this now, the teens.
Whatever this is.
I don't know what this is.
21st century.
Yes, exactly. It feels old, though, now. Craig, what about you? What have you been doing from the geeky world of TV, movies, books?
Well, I mean, as we said earlier in this segment, Russ, we're right on the edge. Everybody in the universe is going to see Star Wars 7 tomorrow. You and I are going to see it the day after, and the countdown is killing me. It's kind of like occluding everything else that I could be looking forward to at the moment. But so that's looming large. I'm doing everything I can to avoid any kind of spoilers. Of course, the premiere was on Monday. We're recording on Wednesday, so the reviews are now out. I'm not reading anything. I had one of my students go, "Hey, did you know?" And I started screaming at them. I think I might have shocked them. They're not used to that kind of violent behavior. So that's really looming large. I have, with all of the shows wrapping up their fall season sections, I'm trying to finish that up. I just finished Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. They're up to their mid-season finale. I really enjoyed that. I think that whole plot is getting really cool, and the acting is still great, and the writing is still great. Finished Jessica Jones.
Yeah, what'd you think? I
Netflix.
love that. What'd you think of the end?
I thought it was. I thought the whole thing was awesome. I thought the end was a tiny little anticlimactic.
Right.
The way it ended, but I thought it was amazing. Right up to that was amazing. So I loved that. I am currently listening to The Aeronauts Windlass, of course, by Jim Butcher, recommended by Russ Wakelin.
What do you think?
And I'm really enjoying it. It's I hope he doesn't Codex Alera it. But
I liked
right
it all the
now,
way through. I haven't found anything like that yet. But
no. That took several books
Right.
for him to
Right.
kind of just let the cool stuff go by the wayside and focus on some more strange stuff. And I finished Star Wars Battlefront Twilight Company, the novel of the game by Alexander. I can't even read that. Anyway, I said it last episode. And I am now reading or just started Star Wars Lost Stars, which is a young adult book that is set to bridge the last movie. There's a whole series of books by a bunch of different authors. The main ones are by Chuck Wendig. Those are the ones that are like in the present tense and everything. But there's a whole series of different books by different authors following different plot lines that link the original 3 movies to the movie that comes out in the next couple days.
Right.
And one of them is Lost Stars, which is a young adult, like I said. So I am approximately 1% into that yet. So I'll let you know how that goes.
All right.
What about you, Russ? What's dominating your universe right now?
Well, Star Wars. Just finished watching Jedi with the kids. So we're all, Return of the Jedi. We're all caught up now to right before the movie comes out. My kids made an interesting comment this evening, and that was, Dad, I don't think there's any movies for us that all of the kids have seen and know the way you can quote Star Wars. Because like they were at the very end where it shows all the different areas, and it's showing Bespin, right? And it shows the little starships flying over, and what Dar's like, what is that? I said, that's a twin pod cloud car from Bespin. And they're like, how do you know that? I'm like, because I had the toy when I was like 10. I said, this is, we all, it's Star Wars. Everybody had this. I mean, it was growing up, and it was like, like My Little Pony, where you guys could name all the My Little Ponies. And it's like, yeah, but there's no movie like that for us. Like, what are you talking about? This Harry Potter? He goes, nah, not everybody's seen Harry Potter. And that was a book first. That doesn't count. I said, well, Lord of the Rings. Well, Lord of the Rings is a book first. That doesn't count. I was like, well, I couldn't honestly think of one, actually. I couldn't think of a movie genre for this generation that is like Star Wars.
Right.
Which was weird. I feel like I'm wrong. So listeners, let me know what the one is. But my kids don't think there is one, which is interesting. Unless it's based on a book, which is from a prior generation typically. So there you go.
Right, yeah. Yep.
So I thought about that. That was interesting. Maybe it'll come. Maybe it'll get them later. I don't know. Now, also in the TV world here, Craig, I've been watching Once Upon a Time.
Yeah.
Now I'm all caught up.
I'm intrigued by this, Russ, because I actually I never started this season and just deleted all of the season and my season pass to Once Upon a Time because I realized I didn't care anymore. So what's going on Once Upon a Time?
I cared about it. I mean, my kids love it, right? I mean, absolutely love it. Like, so we have several different shows, and we don't watch regular television, right? So we watch all these shows on Hulu or Netflix or whatever they're on, and they all just back up, kind of like your DVR. And so eventually they'll all, and the show they always ask for, is there a new one every time we sit down in the evening to have family TV time? It's is there a new Once Upon a Time? So it's their favorite show, which is interesting because they love to pick on it. It's like MST3K in my house. Like they just rip it apart. But it's got to the point now where it's gone to plaid. Like, I don't think I want to spoil it for anyone who's actually watching the show, but when the original bad guy, former bad guy, now turned good guy, turned bad again.
And that would be Hook.
This is the third character who's done this. Yes.
Yes.
It felt a little like, we could stop now. It's still fun. They're keeping it a little bit fresh by occasionally slipping in another Disney character. So last season it was Frozen. This season they've got Merida in there from Brave. So they're still trying to slip those other characters in there, and they do a good job with those. So those are fun. But the actual overall story arc, the whole thing with Merlin and Camelot this season,
really?
Yeah, I don't know. It's my kids still like it, so I watch it with them. If my kids did not like it, I think I would be with you, Craig. I think I'd have moved on. So
that's unfortunate.
It's unfortunate because I think they had something kind of fun and silly there that was at least enjoyable. Now speaking of series that I think have a lot of potential, Have you had a chance to watch The Expanse yet, Craig? You didn't mention
Yes,
it.
Listeners will remember that I had watched it during our last episode, and you had to stop because Nicole hadn't read it yet.
So I have watched the entire first episode.
And what'd you think?
Erroneously started watching the third episode.
How?
So, well, here's what they did. So this is interesting. So on the non-traditional media, so on like Xbox or iTunes or whatever, you could download episode 1 way early.
Right. Yeah. Well, they put it online that was all their marketing was based on that.
So, and so we watched it last week. Then I see there's more episodes yesterday. Now,
really?
episode 2 wasn't supposed to air till yesterday, but the day before yesterday was the day before yesterday. There were 2 more episodes. I was like, whoa. And I jumped into the episode right after episode 1, started watching it. And only about 30 seconds in, since last time on The Expanse, I realized I had not seen half these scenes. And it was because they had accidentally put episode 3 and 4 up on the internet.
Really?
And not episode 2, because episode 2 hadn't aired yet. So someone somewhere goofed. But in any case, really enjoyed episode 1. I have one little concern, which is they've introduced too many characters. So they
really
yes, I think so. So not for me, not for someone who's read the book. If you have not read the book, I think the bouncing back and forth between Miller and the crew works. But then adding in the politician there, what's her name? Avasarala. She's not there in the book at that time. I don't mind because I love her character. Wouldn't mind more screen time with her. But I think the new person trying to watch the show is now trying to follow 3 story arcs at a time in the very first episode. I think that might confuse people.
I don't know about that. I don't think so.
So what I've heard from my friends who've watched it, who have not read the books, who watched episode 3 by mistake, is that they were able to follow episode 3 very well. They had trouble following episode 1. So hopefully
that's common too. Yeah. You got to pick it up.
Yeah. So I'm just hoping they don't. Otherwise, I think it's great. I love all the characters. A couple of the characters, almost most of the characters look like I think they should. Holden looks too young to me. I thought he'd be a little older.
I felt the same way. Yeah.
Amos doesn't feel right to me. I would have thought Amos was African American. I don't know why I had that feeling, but I just felt reading the book he was. He's not on the TV show. That's not a big deal, but it just felt different to me.
Yeah.
But other than that, everybody else has pretty much nailed the character. Like I like who they have for Naomi and everything. Like everything else just like works for me and looks just right. Miller's hat is awesome.
Yes, it is.
They nailed it. So I'm really enjoying it. I think it's got a great opportunity here. I hope it appeals beyond just the book readers because it's going to need to get the traction. I can tell it's a very expensive show to produce because the effects are awesome. Yeah. So I'm nervous for it like I was nervous for Firefly in that it's expensive. So unless it gets a large viewership quickly, it's going to be in trouble, I think. But I really like it. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, well, God knows they're pumping it.
Yeah, I hope so.
It's all over the place.
Hope so.
Advertising-wise.
And I was nervous, too, when I saw episode 3 first. It's like, oh, no, they're airing them out of sequence. It's Firefly all over again.
You had a flashback.
I know, right? But I guess it was... So I haven't checked it today, because I guess yesterday was when episode 2 aired, and so now what you should see online is 1, 2, 3, and 4, which would be awesome. That's great. So if they pull a Netflix and let you kind of binge-watch them, because that would also help, right? If you could binge-watch them, it would help with the whole character development, what's going on here arc, because you'd be sort of engaged longer. So maybe that would work. So, Expanse, loving it. Fingers crossed for awesome. Finally, Audible.
Yes.
Listening to, I just finished up Finishing School by Gail Carriger. This is the series that is the young adult version of the prequel series to her works, her universe, where it's taking place in the 1800s and it's in Victorian England. And these are young ladies or women, depending on the series you're reading, who are perfectly mannered, upper crust England, but also are spies. And they're, by the way, they're fighting werewolves and vampires while enjoying high tea. So it's sort of a strange universe, but I really digged it. The end of the Finishing School series I thought was very well done. Brought it all together, laid out some groundwork for some cool stuff that happens. So you kind of learn who's parents and everything in this series from the later books. I really enjoyed it. So
cool.
Next for me, Craig, that I realized I've only read the first 3 books from the Experience series.
Yeah, you're
on
falling
like
behind.
6 now or something, right? How many are out there now?
I think there's 5 or 6.
Yeah, so they're all on Audible, so I got to get back on this. So so I got to jump back on there. Now, Craig, if other listeners are like me and they realize they're going to watch The Expanse or something and they got to catch up on the books,
you know what? You know what they should do?
What should they do?
They should go to the D6generation.com and they should find the Audible button, because that way they are helping the show by clicking on that button and getting a free 30-day membership that comes with a free book. That free book could easily be any of the Expanse books. and they get a membership for the entire 30 days, a 30-day free membership, which unlocks all of the cool sales and deals, which I think they're wrapping up right now. But they have like a huge 50% off sale that runs for a long time, right around Christmas.
Right.
Just as an example of one sale. So yeah, so if you go to the D6 Generation and you find that the link to the Audible website, you'd go there, you sign up, you get a free credit that can be any book you want, including Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey, which is the first book in the Expanse series, and all those cool deals for 30 days.
And these books, by the way, the Expanse books appeal to everyone. So I recommend them to my wife. And Nicole, now she does like Star Wars and other sci-fi, and she blasted through them, loving every minute of them, reading right through those things on her little nook there. So yeah, that series is a good gift idea. I know it's after Christmas, but
that's true. Yeah, there are currently 6 books.
There you go. Not counting
There's,
the
Leviathan Wakes, Caliban's War, and Abaddon's Gate, which are the original trilogy. Then there's Sibylla Byrne, which is the one that I read that I told you about that takes place in another galaxy entirely. Then there's Nemesis Games, which I think Babylon's Ashes may not. Yeah, it's not out yet. It's supposed to be June 16, 2016. That one's supposed to come out. So not for another 6 months or so. But Nemesis Games is the next one that I got to do when I finish with the Aeronauts Windless right now.
Nice.
And I do want to throw in one more thing I forgot, that I'm catching up the Continuum, which of course was that TV show about time travel that David Weber got us all caught up on. They got themselves a final 6-episode series to wrap up their series story. When they were going to get canceled, they backed off and they gave them a 6-episode final series. I'm 2 episodes in, and the special effects of powered armor are weak. That's the bad news. They're like really weak. Like you're getting chased around the city by really bad CGI. The good news there is that they soon come up with a plot device for them to get out of their armor, and so they're like kick butt future SEALs going around doing all kinds of cool stuff, but they don't have their armor on. It's sort of in Iron Man-esque sentry mode. But there are some awesome fights. I just finished episode 2 today, and there are some really cool fights. The fight choreography is absolutely stellar. And the girl that plays the love interest of the smart genius guy is one of the best female fight choreography actors with fight choreography I've ever seen. She just really sells it, and you just buy it. And the fight choreography uses her. It's a lot like I said with Into the Badlands, but actually way better than Into the Badlands. Even the fight choreography really is realistic for a woman of her size, and there's a lot of like really acrobatics and stuff. And then it ended with a big giant fist fight where there's a gun, and the gun is being used basically to punch and then shoot. And the guy is like a futuristic super soldier, so he's getting shot. He doesn't really care. And he's like, it's very, very cool fight scenes in Continuum. So anyway, enjoying that. I hope for the best, and 4 episodes more, and then that's over forever. That's all I've got.
Well, that's achievements. We'll be back shortly with Rick to talk more about Beyond the Gates of Antares.
Beyond the Gates of Antares.
In a world where board gaming was king, in a time when Kickstarter ruled the web, when every day brought more and more games, now, more than ever, 2 men, and a revolving third chair, and a girl, a total fangirl, brought a shining light into the darkness so that all mankind would know what to buy. They are the D6 Generation.
Hey, and now it's time to talk about our friends over at wolflayer.com. That's right, the folks who build Army Builder, Hero Lab, and Realmworks, some of Craig and mine's favorite software. And, I'm getting ready to pass this on to the next generation. So I've mentioned before on the show that my daughter, Rose, is quite GM. She's running, I think, 6 campaigns now in Dungeons & Dragons. And she was asking me, Dad, what software do you use when you run our campaign? What is that cool software you're using? Because I have the laptop in front of me with Realmworks tracking all the stuff the characters are doing. But then behind me, I have a television that has the player view on it. And they can see pictures of the monsters they're fighting. And I have maybe maps that are slowly revealing. And she wanted to know what I was using because she's got so much information to track. And so I showed her Realmworks, and she's just starting to get into it now. And really, if you're a Dungeon Master, and if you're like my daughter, and you're running several campaigns, there is really no better way to keep it all straight than with Realmworks. And the best part about it is, a lot of us GMs, we like to have notebooks. We love the paper and pen. That's great. But, if you do a lot of remote game playing and you travel a lot and you're running different campaigns and you got to bring all that stuff with you, the books are enough to carry around. Having to carry around separate spiral bounders, all your notes and your characters and your NPCs and all that information. Wouldn't it be great if it was all in a computer? Wouldn't it be great if it was all really, really self-organizing and you could click various links to take you from your description of the town right to the tavern they're about to enter, right to the bartender and all his stats, right to the magic item hidden in the basement. All that information's tracked very easily, quickly, and simply for you in Realmworks. And now they've got great packages as well that tie right to it. Also, and bring in pre-made content from a lot of the great game systems out there like Pathfinder and others. Speaking of Pathfinder, be sure you check out all the great updates to Hero Lab for Pathfinder. A lot of updates there. Great additions to the Hero Lab app for iPad now. And of course, if you're a miniature wargamer, don't miss out on Army Builder, the ultimate way to create and crank out those army lists. Fight your monsters, not your tools. Wolflair.com.
And now, in an attempt to bring a small amount of dignity and decorum to this otherwise base form of entertainment, and I use the term loosely, I am proud to present...
Oh, get on with it. It's time for App of the Ep.
Seriously, Wakeland, I used to have my own segment, and now I'm relegating to announcing this pap...
Hey, you're lucky we still use you. Hey everyone, welcome back to another App of the Ep. This time around I got a sort of a collection, a hodgepodge, if you will, of apps. There are actually only 2 you have to purchase, but each comes with 4 to 5 games in each. And these are party games I recently discovered. They've been out a little while, but I only found out about them recently, actually at work. A couple of coworkers, actually 8 of them, were playing at one time in the kitchen. And I was really impressed by this game, and I had to run home and pick it up for my family. And we played the heck out of it over Christmas. And hopefully if you hear this before New Year's, it's a great one at New Year's as well. Great party games. And these are, of course, the Jackbox Party Pack 1 and Jackbox Party Pack 2 also just came out. And these both are pretty interesting. Our favorite in Jackbox 1, first of all, how do you get these games? They are available on the PS4, the PS3, the Xbox 360, the Xbox One, and Steam. Pretty much any way you want. But what's cool about this game is you don't just play on a computer. You also play with your phones, and they're really are party games. Most of them support up to 8 players, sometimes even more, up to 100 players, depending how you look at this. It's pretty interesting. So how it works is these are really server-based games. So what happens is you fire up Xbox Party Pack 1, or I'm sorry, Jackbox Party Pack 1, and you fire this up on the host machine, so it might be your Xbox, might be your PS4, might be your PC running it on Steam. My favorite's on the console because this really works best when it's on the big TV in your living room, right? So you fire this up, and the games start up, and there's 4 different games you can choose from in Jackbox. And my personal favorite, of course, the original You Don't Know Jack is in there, which is basically an irreverent party game. But my personal favorite is Drawful. And what happens is up on the screen, pops up this big white screen. It tells you about to play Drawful, and it tells a room code. Everybody pulls out their phones, their smartphones, opens up their web browsers, no apps to download, open their web browsers, go to jackbox.tv, and type in the room code along with their name. So dad types in dad, mom types in mom, the kid puts in their name, aunt and Grammy and grandpa puts in their names in. So everybody's got a smartphone, can jump in and play this game. And then in Drawful, my personal favorite, you're then asked to draw a little avatar of yourself, and you get a little white screen on your phone, and just using your finger like you do on a touch device, just draw whatever picture you want. And people draw a little silly face, or maybe they draw a rocket or a ship or something, whatever they want. That becomes your avatar. And then in Drawful, each player is given a picture to draw, and on their phone, they see a title of the picture. So it might be, man eating spaghetti or something, anything. It's kind of like, this game is kind of like Telestrations meets Balderdash. So everybody draws their pictures that matches their phrase. And then depending on the players, you draw more than one picture. So in most cases, if you got more than 5 players, everybody draws one picture. And then what happens is one of the players' pictures at random is shown on the screen on the television, and everybody then is asked to type in what they think it is. Now, the person who drew the picture doesn't do anything. They just sit there and wait. So you type it in. So the person might have drawn a man eating spaghetti, but you might think that's, a noodle with a ball on the end or something. So everybody types these things in. And then after everybody types their answers in, the main screen then shows, the TV shows the entire room, the picture, along with everyone's statement of what it is, along with the actual correct answer. And then you must all vote and pick which one you think the correct answer is. Then the game goes through and shows you what everybody picked. Now, if you drew the picture and they picked your picture, then you get 1,000 points, and the person who draw the picture gets 1,000 points. So if 2 people guessed correctly, the drawer of the picture is going to get 2,000 points, and everybody who guessed right gets 1,000. But if you pick someone else's answer that isn't the correct answer, then that person who made the answer gets 500 points for everybody picked his answer. Makes sense? So you can, it's a really easy way to score. It leads to, now what's also fun is you can then, while you're waiting for everybody else to type in their answers or pick their answers, you can like the other silly, wacky answers as well. And then there's a little sort of a prize at the end as well for whoever had the most likes because the most wackiest answers. So this game is hilarious. It's a lot of fun to draw on. It's just a great, great way. It's probably the simplest party game ever once you get it all set up because you just fire up your Xbox and or your PS4, your console, or even your PC plugged into a big screen, and away you're going, you're playing. Another great game, Fibbage, which is essentially Mad Libs for a mob. So they'll give you a sentence with a blank in it, and then everybody has to fill in the answer. But the sentence is usually stating something of fact, like, the author of Willy Wonka was buried with chocolate, a book, and everybody types in what the third thing the person was buried with. And, of course, the game also shows the real answer, and everybody tries to guess the real. And similar to Drawful, you score based on people picking the wrong answer, the one you gave, the best lie, if you will. Another great game. You don't know Jack's a trivia game. So you get 4 really fun games. The best 2, I would say, the best 3, really. Fibbage, Drawful, and what I'm trying to say, You Don't Know Jack are all worth the price of admission on the first set. The second set really just expands what you got in the first set in a couple interesting ways. So first, Fibbage 2, which adds more categories. One of the biggest problems with Fibbage is there's not a lot of different questions for a category in the first one. So once you played it a few times, you kind of start to know the answers, unfortunately. Fibbage 2 adds a lot more to that. That's a 2 to 8 player game. Earwax we didn't care for in the second set. It's like a sound-based one. Couldn't get into that one too much. But we did like Bidiots. So Bidiots is like the next level, very gamery version of the Drawful, which was remember Drawful's the one where you go ahead and draw the pictures and then you vote for crazy answers. Bidiots actually sets up where you're drawing artwork and then there's hidden information where different players in the room know the value of the artwork, and so they figure if they can buy it cheap. So it's basically an auction game. So the drawing someone made comes up, and you know that girl sitting next to moon is worth $3,000, and you see something drawn on the screen that you think might be, you're not sure, girl sitting next to moon, and the bid's only $500. Well, if you buy it now, you're going to make a lot of money. So you might be willing to bid it up a little bit because you know the true value, because you know what your buyer's willing to pay. Not everybody else in the room knows its value, but they guess it might be worth more, and they see you bidding it. And then other things will pop up on your phone, and it'll say things like, player Nicole knows the value of this work of art. And so she starts bidding it up. I can try to counterbid. Really interesting game, too. So Bidiots is a lot of fun as well. So these 2 packs are I think their list price is $25 for each pack. And only one player needs to buy it and put it on their TV screen. Everybody else just jumps right on their phone for free. Really innovative use of technology. Very, very clever. Of course, it runs great on a PC as well. I really recommend it on something that's plugged into a large TV. So the consoles really, really shine here. So check it out. That is the Jack Party Box version 1 and version 2 are both excellent. Find them now on pretty much any platform of your choice.
Thank you for listening to another scintillating edition of App of the Ep, a segment in which,
Hey, less of that. More just getting on with the show.
seriously, Wakeland, you are like school in summer. No class.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. And so, of course, we have Rick Priestley back on the show, and we're going to talk about his latest endeavor, the Beyond the Gates of Antares.
Yes.
Welcome, Rick. Welcome back. It's so exciting to have you back with the show.
Welcome, guys. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to being interrogated.
Yes. So if you've been with us, it's great, right? So grab the paddles there, Rick. They are electrified. Don't let go.
I know.
Excellent. So
It hurts.
So it'll all be over soon.
Right, one way or another.
Now, 2 + 2 is what? Sorry.
Wow, 84. Good old school reference there. Nicely done. So if you remember, folks who've been listening for a while will remember that Rick was kind enough to join us back in 2013, February of 2013.
Wow.
Back in the middle when there was a Kickstarter for this little game called Beyond the Gates of Antares. And it was the first time that most of us had heard of this. And following the D6 generation curse, such as it is,
yes,
it seems
this happened on multiple.
It seems that most folks who come on our show to talk about their Kickstarters, shortly after that, the Kickstarter generally tends to
end.
Stop. Right. So Rick, can you give us a little? I know when you were on the show last time, you told us that Beyond the Gates of Antares was a very long-ranging vision that you and some other folks you're working with have had, and the Kickstarter was just sort of a way to sort of boost it, but it was already ongoing, and then clearly it survived post-Kickstarter. Can you kind of give us some insight into what happened around the Kickstarter time and how you kind of how the project moved on from there?
Yeah, sure. Well, as you know, the Kickstarter didn't fund, but we were being quite ambitious. And I think at the time we were really not sure what a Kickstarter was, if I'm honest. And exactly what a Kickstarter was in terms of miniatures, I think was kind of shaking out a little bit at the time. And what we were really trying to do was raise some money to fund the project. And the project was only just starting. And when it didn't actually fund, largely because we didn't already have everything done, which if we'd had, we wouldn't have had to have gone to the Kickstarter, of course.
Of course.
We decided, well, there's a good idea in here. There's lots of great stuff. Let's just kind of do it ourselves, which meant that I've spent the best part of 3 years kind of working away on it, on my own, mostly in terms of games design. And Warlord have funded the models and everything else, so mostly out of their own business.
Okay.
So so it's gone slowly, and we've still not got. I mean, what we have so far is nothing like the full scope of what we'd imagined we'd do for the Kickstarter, because we talked about doing all sorts of things for that, including online gaming and coordinating the whole world development with an online scenario, which we can't really quite do yet.
Sure. I remember it was very, very ambitious. I remember lots about evolving rules and the whole online elements, and it sounded really fascinating. I'm trying to recall now, was Warlord involved with the Kickstarter from the beginning, or did they come in afterwards and say, this sounds like a great idea, we'd like to help you take it to completion?
They were on board from the beginning, but they were on board as like a partner.
Okay.
And what I did was, after we failed to get the Kickstarter going with the company we founded, it's called DocSpace, to do that. What we did was we kind of took over the project at Warlord.
Got it.
And I don't work for Warlord, but I am an investor and part of Warlord, if you see what I mean.
Sort of the board of directors type person for Warlord.
It actually only has 2 directors, and I'm not one of them. But,
Fair enough.
But investor is probably more accurate.
Fair enough.
But they're all my friends. I mean, the people at Warlord are all guys I worked with when I was at Games Workshop for years. And, John Starlard, who's the real owner of Warlord, he's been my very good friend for years and years and years, and was in fact best man at my wedding. So
so there you go.
There you go.
Excellent. Yeah. So it's see, that's in business, everyone. It's all about the network. It's all about the network. Just
all about who you have as your best man. Really.
Apparently, yes.
That's it.
Pick wisely. Don't pick that loser.
Right.
You got to pick one that's going to help
a winner. So you then you and Warlord and of course there's folks work together to take it from where it was at the Kickstarter time all the way to launch. And it literally just launched like within 2 months ago, right? Was it when did it launch?
November. Yeah, first week in November, I think.
So really about a month ago now. So it's been live for a month. The volume of releases has been impressive. So, Craig and I have talked on the show many times that usually one of the biggest downfalls, I mean, assuming the miniature game can get the rules right, more about that later, and assuming the miniature game can get some good sculpts, more about that later, the biggest failure that miniature games have right beyond that is they come out with a limited number of choices and factions. And so it doesn't quite capture the imagination, because unless you fall in love with one of those two factions right in the beginning, you're probably going to revert to one of the existing miniature games that have lots of factions. But you guys seem to have sort of decided to wait till launch until you had a lot of stuff ready, and you've sort of hit the ground running within a month. I'm already seeing gaming stores in my area with army deals for 5-6 factions right there. I mean, was that a conscientious, clearly it was a conscious decision, but how important was the faction count in the model selection for you guys as you launched?
Oh, yeah, very vital, really. I think you've got it in one. You can't just launch a game and expect people to wait for years and years for all the models. Having said that, nor can we launch everything we've got ready all at once. If our manufacturing process couldn't cope with it, so we've actually been releasing the models in small tranches for the past 2 years. So little by little, we've been building up a small range, and we've had a kind of a beta set of rules available, which people have been playing and giving me feedback on. I don't know if you saw those, but they were. So we've kind of approached this game bit by bit, and it's worked reasonably well. And it's allowed me to make sure that the factions have developed in an organic way. So you have an idea of what the character's going to be like, but when you start playing, you see new opportunities. And as you play more, you think, like, this army would be great, but the thing that would really emphasize this character would be this other thing. And you add more and you add more and you develop. So what I really like about the fact that it's taken so long is that we've been able to grow a game and a background and the model range in a very organic way that just feels right. It all clicks together. And that I think that's worked to our benefit. And we've actually got a big model range designed already, including lots of vehicles. But we can't productionize, if that is a word. We can't productionize them all at once.
Yeah, I think the
word.
And
of course, people, you have to wait till we're actually able to produce them.
But that's awesome, and you can see that. So I think what's interesting about this game, and I think what appealed to me when I actually got my hands on the starter set about a few weeks ago now, was a few things. One was that it did not feel like, it clearly didn't feel like someone woke up 6 months ago and had a game idea and scribbled it all down on paper and got it into a book. Like, this is clearly something that someone's been thinking about for a very long time, has been evolving for a very long time. Each of the factions has a lot of material around it. The universe has a lot of material around it. But then when I started seeing things on the forums and in the book, like, for example, all the vehicles, first of all, there's rules for all the elements of the game that most miniature gamers who like army, large engagement type games want to see eventually, right? They want command units, they want artillery, they want vehicles, and of course lots of infantry. And you see all that in the book, and you see these little sort of side view diagrams of these things, including all the vehicles. And then to know that those are actually the part of the digital stuff you guys are working on to lay the vehicles out. So it wasn't like that these vehicles are years and years away. They're actually, we've got the mock-ups ready. You're thinking them through, and now you're just prioritizing which comes next, assuming the initial game sales do well. Is that kind of where it is right now?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Russ. In fact, our sculptor, who was also called Russ, which is just to confuse matters, he rendered the three-dimensional images into those views that you see in the book. So all of the vehicles, and in fact most of the weapons, are of a kind of a print or a version of the 3D the 3D design he's done. So all those things are real, and
I think that's brilliant, because I know. Craig, you can talk more about this too, but when miniature gamers select a faction for a game, right? It's about much more than rules, right? I mean, obviously you want a faction that you think is going to be fun and fit your play style, but so much of it, since you spend so much time, assembling and painting models, so much of it is sort of that visceral reaction. Does a faction look and appeal to me in a visual way? And a lot of game companies, when they say vehicles are coming, you don't see what they're going to look like. So you have no idea what your faction's vehicles or artillery is going to look like. And what's nice about this is since players know that these are what their things are going to look like, they kind of can sort of see and imagine,
make an educated choice,
guess at what their army's going to look like. The C3 will have the hovers, and the GAR will have a lot of walker vehicles and that kind of thing. You get a really good feel for what it's going to look like.
Well, it also gives you a feel like you're getting involved in a game that has a really solid foundation already, as opposed to, if you look at a lot of miniatures games, when they come out, the books are relatively thin, or they're not really easy to, the fluff is not very well organized, or it's organized in a different way. And it's like Russ said, it's lacking in a lot of the foundational elements, like the graphics or the visuals of some of the more advanced units that are maybe down the pipe. And when you open the book for Beyond the Gates of Antares, what you're getting is you've got all these different kinds of infantry, but then on top of that, you've got the army lists for everything. So if you want to test it out, you can. But you can also see what the models are going to look like, because you've got all these renders that are done in a very cool in-universe sort of spec diagram sort of way. And I think it's a really great way to approach the whole thing, because you really feel like you're working you're buying into a game that's been around for a while, which this one has, obviously, that been around for 3 years or more, and been developing and growing and sort of like accreting on its own, Rick, like you said, sort of in an organic way. And that really gives the game a foundation that I think no matter how much work or genius you have behind it, I don't think if you're going to knock it out in, like, say, 6 months, like Russ said, it's not going to have this kind of a concrete feel to it, I think, which is great. It really gives you some faith in the game system that you're buying into.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Craig. That's great.
Oh, you're very welcome.
That's a ringing endorsement, that is. I actually felt that we were very compromised when it came to some of the artwork and presentation, because we have such a tiny budget. And what we did was, I think we were just very pragmatic, and we made the most of what we had. Yeah. Because we know what people want to see. Exactly as you say, you want to see what the vehicles look like. You want at least an idea of what some of the other things look like, even if you can't literally see the very model you're going to be buying. Right. You want an idea of what they're like, don't you? As well as their character and the things they're associated with. And we tried to tick all those boxes. But I was very much aware that we didn't have an in-house artist with us. So there's not as much artwork as I would really have liked in the book. And that's because we just couldn't afford it. Because I know Warlord comes across as being quite a kind of big corporate, mega company. But it really isn't. I mean, compared to something like Games Workshop, we're a tiny, tiny, tiny little company. And when we started the project, we only had one in-house figure designer for doing everything. So he's doing World War II, he's doing Napoleonics, he's doing ancients, he's doing everything. And then we had some freelancers who did extra as well. Mm-hmm. So, it was quite a leap for Warlord quite a leap of faith in many ways. I'm very grateful that we've taken it, because we now have just wait for this. Two in-house figure designers.
You've doubled your investment,
and it gets better, Greg.
Resources.
Because we've got another half, because Russ works for us part time. So we've got 2 full-time and 1 half-time figure. So there you go.
Nice, very good.
250%.
Right.
And Games Workshop, by way of comparison, has well over 20 full-time sculptors, and probably more like about 30, I think, last time I heard.
Well, I think that's a great segue into talking a bit about the models and the plastics. And I wanted to get your sort of your thought and thoughts on some of the decisions you guys made, because I think they're really interesting. I'm sitting here now, in just a full disclosure, surrounded by 12 GAR model suits that I put together.
Which is pathetic when you consider my 40 Concorde
Well,
troops.
But my guys are like twice the size of yours and can snap their neck with it.
Anyway. How do they fight? Let's get into that.
Sounds like a draw.
Anyway, so what's interesting about these guys is, when I first saw them, I thought, well, gee, if Craig and I each buy the starter box and we swap plastic, so I take all the GAR and he takes all the C3 guys, he'll be getting the better end of the deal because they're getting a lot more plastic. But then when I actually saw the GAR sprues, I realized, I don't think that's the case. I've got a lot of plastic here, and these guys are really, really. actually, when you look at pictures of the Gar in particular, they don't look that posable, but really you can do a lot with them.
I think they're probably even more posable than the Concorde troops.
I've got one climbing a ladder. I've got them mantling over rocks and walls, and this is all an effort, Rick. I'm going to take pictures of these and put them on your Facebook page to try to encourage you to increase their agility stat some. Good
luck with that. Good luck with that.
Right. But having a great time with them. So, did you guys? What were you thinking behind when the models were coming and the sculpts were going to happen, and you decided to go predominantly with plastic and multi-part sprues, and what was some of your thought process behind that?
Oh no, we always wanted to do plastics, particularly for the core troop types. But as I say, Warlord not being that big a company and our resources being a little bit more constrained than you might imagine, we can only do a little bit at a time. But we always imagined doing plastics. We do see that as being a major part of the Antares offer going forward. Mm-hmm. We just can't do it all at once.
Sure.
So a lot of the vehicles, for example, are going to be resin or a mixture of resin and metal. But we are already starting on cutting steel for plastic vehicles.
Oh, great. I can't wait for the vehicles.
We always intended to do plastic, and we couldn't really do a starter set that had metal in it. It was just too expensive. Right. So the idea of doing some plastic for the starter set was always there. Now, it wasn't originally going to be Concorde and Gar.
Oh, really?
No, it was going to be Concorde and Isaurians, because those two are very well opposed.
Yeah, and it also makes sense from the storyline for a starter box to have those two forces.
So why did Gar push out the other faction there and get in the front row?
Well, two things happened. The guy we put the Isaurian design with a freelance designer who didn't come up with it, and then in the end we had to bow out. So our one, remember we had the one designer that we have, Wojtek, who's Polish, by the way. So he's come over from Poland, and now we make him sit at a desk in Nottingham. And poor lad, he's a lovely bloke. And he said, "Well, I'll do because he did all the Boromites." But he was quite keen on doing the Isaurians as well. So we said, "Okay, you can do the Isaurians as well." But because he's our full-time designer, Paul, our studio manager, basically said, "Yes, you can do them if you do them in your own time at home." So poor old Wojtek, he's been beavering away, but he couldn't keep up. He basically the rate of work was too much. Bearing in mind he's sculpting all day, making Napoleonic Portuguese or something equally exciting. And then he has to go home at night and sculpt as well.
That was a little bit of historical snobbery, in case you missed it.
Sorry, what? I don't know what you mean. And so we fell behind with the Isaurians. And as the Isaurians developed, they became more spiky. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the concept was always that they were slightly organic. They had that little bit of Geiger-esque feel about them, slightly spooky. Mm-hmm. But when Wojtek started to sculpt them, they started to become a little bit spiky. Well, spiky things don't really make good plastics. Mm. They're difficult to render. Uh-huh. So that sort of gave us a bit of a steer. But more importantly, we just didn't have the designs done. At the same time, Russ came on board to design for us. And the first thing he did was the Algorin. And he's a 3D sculptor, so he's sculpting digitally. And he's also I won't say he's learning, because he's actually a very good sculptor, but he's getting better and better all the time. He's not a fully mature sculptor. Mm-hmm. Every time you make something, you look at it and you go, "Wow, that's the best thing you've ever done, Russ." But which is great, Yeah. But at the same time, you kind of want to find things for him to do that play to his strengths, and digital sculpting is very good for things that are like vehicles or robots. You have these non-organic designs. So he came up with this sort of idea of doing robot type things, and I played around with the idea and came up with the concept of the Gar, and pitched them against the Algorin. So the whole idea of the Gar sort of evolved out of an opportunity, a guy's enthusiasm, and the background I'd already done. And as soon as I kind of invented them, they took off. You know, it's one of those things. Sometimes you think that there's perhaps something there in the back of your mind all the time, and you just need something to trigger it, to make it conscious.
I think the Garrick are really interesting. They're my favorite faction, obviously. I think they're brilliant.
I think they're so unique.
What I think's neat about them, and I'm interested to think your because first, what was interesting about them was I noticed they were not during the Kickstarter. So these are obviously a relatively recent invention. And secondly, this idea that they're these little genetically engineered creatures that actually drive these big suits. All of a sudden, you have an orcs and goblins faction, but it's not really orcs and goblins, right? So it's
At all.
Yeah,
but it's what
right.
it is. You got the big brutes, and then you got the little weedy guys, and
Right. But what I mean, it's like this cool that you can tell that's in their DNA, but they look completely unique in their own.
Yeah,
thing.
you don't think of that. It's just they just function like that. They give you that sort of faction feel if you like that sort of thing from a fantasy side. It's really an interesting idea, really fascinating, and they look great.
They do. They look great, don't they? They are very much that orc and goblin faction slot, but I'm trying really hard to steer them away from being orc and goblin like.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, and it's quite difficult because every time I see something online or somebody's done a little bit of fan fiction or whatever, they come across like goblins.
Right.
I'm going, well, actually, I don't really want them to come across like goblins. And yet sometimes, even as I'm writing little bits of fiction, like the Fartok stuff and whatever, it just comes across a little bit goblin-y. And I just have to fight it all the time. Because I don't want them to degenerate into being just a gag faction.
Right.
I want them to have a reality behind them that's quite sinister.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it feels like it's walking the line, the similar sort of stuff you did in 40K a little bit. And I know, the orcs of 40K went back and forth a little bit, but it's sort of a similar line where you've got that. There's obviously, a little bit of, because I want to ask you about this too, as we talk about these factions here it's hard sci-fi, which is awesome. Like if you take the game at the surface level, it's definitely hard sci-fi. You get these genetically engineered robot driving, small creatures. You've got these factions that are battling over destroyed worlds and everything. But then also there's a little bit of hidden tongue-in-cheek, or maybe not so hidden, subtle tongue-in-cheek humor in there. I look at things like Fart Talk's name and the plasma dump, but then also, the Algorans who are from a planet who's been destroyed by environmental problems. There's definitely some other things going on. Was that a how did you want the game to come across? Did you want to have those little
That's
gems?
much less conscious than you might think. Actually, I think it's one of those things where my subconscious is getting the best of me. I didn't. It's the Algorian and Al Gore is an interesting one because that never occurred to me until somebody pointed it out. And then when somebody pointed it out, I went, "Well, who's Al Gore?" I mean, I only know Al Gore as this as an American politician who's sometimes lampooned on Futurama and things like that. I don't have any knowledge of who Al Gore is beyond that because he's
Rumor has it he created the Intel.
He created the internet. Yes, that's right.
As the Emperor of the Moon or something, as I recall. So I vaguely know, and of course he's associated with the climate change and global warming and the famous hockey stick presentation. I believe was Al Gore, wasn't it?
Right.
But I don't know anything about him other than that. And the name just was, I thought it was just quite a cool name. But then when I found out that people associate it with Al Gore, I suddenly started seeing all these other connections. I was thinking, well, curses, I didn't intend that. But there you are. You can't get away from it. I can't claim the same for Fartok. When we came up with Fartok as a concept, it's really like there's this race of creatures who are completely of one mind and one purpose. Right. And here's Fartok. And he's a guy who's actually the rebel. And actually the springboard idea is Spartacus. It's the outcast, the slave revolt. It's Spartacus. So I just started calling him Farticus because I couldn't call him Spartacus. So I just casually started going, well, he's this Farticus kind of character. I'm Farticus. And then when it came to writing him up for real, I thought, well, I've got to call him something. I can't call him Farticus, obviously. That'd be silly. So I just shortened it to Fartok, and I thought, well, I'll get away with that. No one will twig. Curses.
Yeah, you've been how long have you been writing for gamers now? There,
yes, I might have known. Yeah.
I think it's great though. I love that little stuff. I think it makes the games. I think it reminds us that these are games in the end, and we shouldn't take them too seriously. But there's enough there to really get interesting. Which is
I think it has to work as a name properly without it being a gag. And I think I don't think of Fartok as being a gag. I tend to say Fartok rather than Fartok these days.
Well, what's fun about it is during the battles, you get into this little, almost like History of the World Part 1 thing. Well, Craig will say, move Fartok. And I say, it's Fartok. The correct pronunciation thing, which is great.
From now on, it can be Farticus if you like.
Farticus. I like that one better.
And it will be from now on.
Yes, that's right. Excellent. So, so I want to make sure we keep moving. Some other areas I want to talk to you about as well. But Craig, did you have any questions about your favorite faction or any other factions?
No, I just I enjoy the fact that they're sort of tied into human DNA at some point. That aliens will come in eventually, but right now you're looking at a bunch of different people who were humans at least thousands of years ago. I really enjoy the concept of the fluff and reading about the Gates of Antares. It's really a new. It was new for me. It didn't remind me of anything. It was really unique. And I think the models are really coming across that way too, where each faction looks unique. To sort of segue a little bit into rules and factions and stuff, I really enjoy the fact that really right down to the art, like 40K players or people who played 40K at some point. Will be familiar with the force organization chart, and like everybody has to have X number of troops and X number of you can have X number of fast attack. And I'm intrigued and I enjoy looking at the interplay of the fact that every army list has a different force organization chart in Beyond the Gates of Antares that reflects how they play. So it's not just the models that reflect a great deal of forethought and sort of growth, but the force organization charts and things like that as well. And I really like the interplay between the rules and the minis and the models and buddy drones.
Sure. Yeah, they are good, aren't they? Because you don't have to use the army lists. And I think this is something I was quite upfront about. I tried to get that rather more old-fashioned type of gaming in there as an option. But you can't just say to people, do what you like. That's not fair. You have to provide structure. And for people who want formal structure, you have to work it out properly, don't you? You have a duty to do that as a games designer. Regardless of the fact that you might prefer to play games. I prefer to play games that are slightly more narrative. But that doesn't mean that you can't abandon the slightly more competitive or serious-minded gamers. And in fact, you have to test the game in that light, don't you? It has to stack up. The thing I found most difficult, actually, with all those charts and working it all through, was the GAR, because we didn't have enough granularity within the GAR. Mm-hmm. There are relatively few units of GAR, unit types, and they're all quite expensive in terms of points. Mm-hmm. So when you're choosing a GAR army at a small size, it's actually quite restrictive. It's quite difficult to pick a 500-point GAR force.
Right. I think Russ ran into that.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, you would do, yeah.
But what's interesting about... Well, you put a lot of... I think what's interesting about the GAR, and you tell me, it seems to me that you gave the GAR a lot of... Their individual units have a lot of flexibility in some ways, in that, they have different kinds of weapon, fire modes they can choose from. They're extremely hard to kill, obviously, but at the same time... they are very limited. The fact that they are large really puts a hamper on what they can do and what they can get away with. And their agility is extremely low, so they really don't do well in any kind of terrain. And their org charts really dictate. There's some very strict rules in their org charts, so they really are. While they look nigh unstoppable on paper, when you get them to the table, there's a lot of tactical challenge you have to deal with.
Yeah, you tend to find that if people are learning the game, the GAR do very, very well. Mm-hmm. But once people start to understand how the game works, the GAR can do very, very badly.
Yes.
And you really need to start to introduce those backup units, and particularly the outcasts, to give yourself extra dice as much as anything else.
Mm-hmm. I noticed that. I'm anxiously looking forward to those little individual boxes of the outcasts so I can bolster my force and get into the woods, basically.
Yeah, sure. Well, you should be able to buy the figures individually or in blister packs as well.
Excellent.
And the idea is we'd always be able to... What I'm hoping is that we can supply individual figures via mail order.
Oh, great.
You can't necessarily supply those into stores because it would be impractical. But, so you can get the individual figures as well, eventually.
Excellent. Well, let's dive in a little bit to the mechanics here. I'd love to learn a little more about some of the thinking behind some of the rules. Craig and I have played a couple games now. We're looking forward to some more games this week, and have played enough to be dangerous.
Yes.
And found a lot of things. A lot of mechanics that are really great in there. We'll talk more detail later. But first and foremost, it's obviously built on the core mechanics of bolt action, primarily meaning that you reach into a die bag, you pull out a color. Every unit puts a color die into the bag. You pull out a color die that indicates whether it's your turn or your opponent's turn, and you pick which unit's going to activate. What were some of the pros and cons to building on top of the bolt action system?
Well, a big pro was that it was an established system, and I was familiar with it. And we had the dice and everything ready made, so it was almost like an obvious way to go. I didn't originally intend to do that. I originally intended to create a new system, and I experimented with a new sequencing system, and it was working up to a point, but I couldn't expand it very easily. It was one of those kind of systems that works great with set forces, but as soon as you started to expand the forces, it collapsed. And I thought, well, I'm struggling to get this to work. And every time I'm playing with someone, because all the guys I'm playing with at Warlord play bolt action,
right?
And every time I'm playing with someone, they're all looking at me going, "Yeah, you ever thought of using the bolt action system?" And as a games designer, I'm a great believer in listening, watching and listening. How people react is often tells you more than you sitting there and theorizing. Actually watching people playing games, not telling them how to play, but watching what they do and seeing how they react, and you learn from that. And in the end, I just kind of let that sink in, and in the end, I thought, I could do worse than just steal the bolt action system outright.
Especially since they're already working with you.
Yeah, well, because the system was invented by Alessio Cavatore.
Right.
So I was personal pride was at stake here. So,
could you beat Alessio, the rule mechanic? That was the question.
I swallowed my pride. I thought, damn it. He's stolen off me often enough over the years. I hear, if you're listening to this, Alessio, thank you very much. It's a genius system.
Excellent.
And I thought, well, I can make use of it. And when we were developing bolt action, we did talk about having variant systems where you had more dice in the bag, and the dice weren't literally connected to the units, because in bolt action, for every one unit, you have one dice. It's as simple as that. But we had considered having rules whereby you put extra dice in either to represent additional command value or units that actually move more than once in a similar way to which they do in Antares, or can do in Antares. So some of those ideas were already there, and I was convinced I could make them work, if you see what I mean. When we did bolt action, we pulled back from a lot of that because they introduced variables and also abstractions that in a World War II game seemed strange, but in a science fiction game you can easily explain away.
Right.
Become much more acceptable.
Well, back to what we were talking about earlier in the flexibility of the GAR, I think that was one of the really interesting mechanics you added, which was this idea that the GAR can purchase as an upgrade the ability to get extra dice in the bag per unit, which helps mitigate the fact that your opponent almost certainly, has more units than you do on the table, but it's not 100% reliable, right? You don't know how many times you're going to pull this trick off, and it is a certain amount of points, so you have to kind of decide carefully if you're going to use it or not.
Yeah, I quite like that sort of approach to games design. I tend to think that you can create balanced stats and you can create a balanced game, and you can absolutely represent things which are better than average or worse than average to a degree with points values. So you have more of something or fewer of something. But once things get beyond that band of slightly better or slightly worse, you really should be loading things with both advantages and disadvantages. So things can be powerful, but they become large, and in becoming large, that means they can't benefit from cover and they can't move into certain sorts of terrain and so on. And also they become slightly more easy to hit because usually with large things you only have to target the body, you don't have to target the center of the base. So if you've got a tank, it's easier to hit because it's a bigger thing.
Right.
And that's how I tend to generally approach game systems, and in the case of the GAR, you just have, because they're the creatures they are, they don't consider risk in the same way in which the Concord guys would, because they're more cheerful about it. So you can have a big advantage because they'll accept a big disadvantage, or they'll accept that it won't necessarily work as well as it could do. You have to be a little bit of a gambler to enjoy playing the GAR. I think I enjoy playing the GAR a lot.
I do too, but it is very much a luck based. But that's fine. I mean, there's still you have to deploy and plan with that luck mitigate. And I like that. I like that element of wargaming, right? Whether it's historical or science fiction and fantasy, which is, whenever combat occurs, there's things that happen beyond your control, whether it's weather or a unit, fails morale or runs away or whatever. And so a good commander figures out how to deal with that. So the real question is, can you mitigate the fact that one of your units just, their plasma booster just failed or whatever, how do you get around that problem?
Yeah, exactly. And with the GAR, actually, that problem of risk is harder to cope with smaller forces. When you get bigger forces, the averages start to work through, and you can there's another unit behind that can take over, or whatever. So it's not necessarily an equal calculation, depending on what your force is, how big your forces are, and what the scenario is. The risk can be more or less. It's quite interesting to work through. Yeah.
So you mentioned easier to shoot larger vehicles. I wanted to ask you about line of sight, because there's always a big debate in game design, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this. So you went with, in Beyond the Gates of Antares, you went with a bit of an abstracted line of sight rule, meaning that it's not true line of sight. You're not getting down to the model's level and trying to see if that arm's sticking up behind the rock. You're going with more of a, hey, if you can, just draw a line on the table. If it doesn't pass through certain things, you can see this guy. What are your feelings on why did you choose to go that way in Antares, and what are your feelings on line of sight in general?
Yeah, it's funny because when people started talking about true line of sight, this was not a concept I ever grew up with. And people started talking about true line of sight, and I assumed they were talking about the kind of abstraction that Antares has, which you do actually kind of go down to the model level in some cases. There are some things you have to be able to see off the head, particularly where you've got a rising and falling table. My Wargames table and most of my friends' Wargames tables are not flat. They're built with rises and falls and so on. So you've got to deal with a situation whereby if you draw a straight line, it runs into a very, very slight slope. You see what I mean?
Right.
Maybe just a millimetre or two above the surface. And if you go, from the middle of my base to the middle of your base, I can't see you because I run into this slight slope, the equivalent of hitting a pebble.
Right.
And so you have to go, you're plainly that's silly. If the guys can see each other, they can see each other. So I kind of developed a system years and years ago, which I've always used when I did 40K and even when I did Warhammer, which is sort of abstract, but it's got an element of common sense, so that as you're playing a game, it should look right. But I think the concept of real line of sight, whereby the terrain is literal, so that blade of grass is a blade of grass, that tree is a tree, is just impossible to play with. Because you're really not playing. You're not playing a war game that represents a reality. You're not having something that's real that you're representing. You're suddenly playing a toy game where the toys are moving over a battlefield, and that toy tree is in the way.
Yeah. When you mentioned true line of sight, and it confused you. I think you're right. I think the way people use true line of sight, meaning the physical, what your eye sees or what a laser pointer finds. That's not really true line of sight. That's more abstracted, because in reality, you won't necessarily be able to see between, but just because there's a millimeter separating two bases in a unit doesn't mean you can see between them. The guys are moving,
exactly
there's dust picking up.
True line of sight has no relationship to reality whatsoever.
Right. So I like the abstractions, and I think it just, my personal preference, and I think Antares gets it right. I think going with sort of getting down to the table level for height, for vertical, is important, because it's really hard to predict the vertical on people's tables. We've all got weird hills. We've got these cool, sculpted tables in some cases. You got buildings all over the place. But most of the time, your line of sight is dictated by a top-down quick snapshot almost. And if it's abstracted enough where I can quickly, in 80 to 90% of the cases, just look at it and know the deal and know the modifiers, the game plays faster and more fun, and you're not niggling over some guy's gun
right.
sticking out.
I was a little concerned that the line of sight rules and the cover rules come across as being quite complex in Antares, and I was aware that they did come across that way. But when you play, it actually is very common sense. I think it's very commonsensical. Or at least I find it so. Perhaps
it worked out for us. Craig had this really cool sort of landing pad that's up on like supports, stilts.
Okay.
And so he's shooting through these stilts at my guys, and we're trying to decide, well, how's this going to work? In other games, you got to look down there and figure out how many stilts are blocking, and you can see a certain percentage of a model, and you would say, well, why don't we just make it, light area terrain under there for Antares, where that way my GAR suits can still walk through there. It's a little tricky because they're navigating around, but then it also counts as, a minus to hit, and that just seemed to make sense and work. And so there's enough, and I also love this. I love the,
unless you're a GAR.
Yes, but what's nice about it is under the because GAR don't get modifiers for being a large star. You see, there's lots of balances here, even though we always save on tens. One of the cool things too is the amount of terrain examples you guys have in the book. So you didn't just go out and say, well, there's such a thing as light terrain and such a thing as heavy terrain. Knock yourself out, figure it out. You actually gave almost like 3 or 4 pages of examples. I think it might be more than that of specific. This is how a swamp works. This is how a barrier works. This is how a forest works. This is how an area of rubble would work. And it really sort of encourages. It does 2 things. One, veteran gamers look at this and go, great, he's got a rule for every bit of terrain in my collection, right? And then, but the new player is like, wow, look at all these great ideas I have for making things for my table.
Yeah, and that's it really. It's getting ideas in front of people because so it's funny, but with 40K being such a dominant force in science fiction wargaming, it's largely stultified that approach. Because Games Workshop are not very, I've never been, and certainly not in recent years, being very open to the gamer input idea. Having a sandbox. Right. When I created 40K all those years ago, I mean the Rogue Trader book is a big sandbox. It's here, play in this, do what you like, and here's lots of ideas.
Right.
And I wanted to get back. I mean, that's what I've always enjoyed with science fiction wargaming. To me, it's it's an opportunity to tell stories, to inhabit a world and to create worlds and adventures and characters. And that's what I wanted to get across in Antares. I wanted to get some of that back. Yeah. So that's why it's all in there, and of course I enjoy making all these things. Not necessarily brilliantly, but I enjoy making that kind of scenery.
Well, making terrain is one of the things that I really enjoy, also, and the way that you've dealt with it in the game is when 40K started to go to true line of sight, I really started to feel like all of my terrain became more of a hindrance, really, and I would make this really cool looking thing that in my head would work a certain way, because in my head it's not like just a block with a window in it, but then with true line of sight, okay, I'm going to shoot this las cannon through that tiny little thing at that and then you're just dead, and in my head I was like, no, but that's a building, and people were like, true line of sight, and so having that abstraction brought back to me was great. It was a great feeling when Russ and I were playing on all this terrain that I've accumulated over the years, many of it going back. I mean, I haven't played 40K in years, but a lot of my terrain goes all the way back to when we played a lot, and it was really nice seeing it almost like I saw almost my entire terrain collection change a little bit in my mind, going back to what I originally envisioned when I built it in the first place, which was a great feeling.
That's interesting you should say that, Craig, because a lot of the terrain I've used, and some of which is photographed in Antares, is terrain I developed when I was working on 40K at Games Workshop.
Really?
So some of it's come all the way over there. And in fact, in our playtesting games, I was using I don't know if you know, but in Rogue Trader, there's a famous tank which is based on a deodorant.
Yes.
I was about to ask.
Yeah. Well, that thing, that hover tank, that was our go-to tank for developing Antares. Nice. It was either that or World War II tank.
That is awesome. That's great. Very cool.
That's awesome. There's a little history there. Now, see, old timers who are listening are really laughing right now.
Right, because there was even a White Dwarf
and there's
article.
A little warm feeling knowing that little deodorant tank still exists.
Right.
Yeah, it's on my shelf in my War Games room.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah.
So Rick, I want to go back to a couple other mechanics that are sort of interesting to me. One of them was you definitely moved Antares beyond the D6. See, the beyond word just comes back and back. It's amazing.
Beyond the D6, yes.
So you've got the core die is D10, but you've even got like some wacky dice in there. Like I've never actually seen a D3 before.
Neither had I.
I thought that was an interesting choice.
It wasn't a choice. They forced it upon me. It was. Really, when I wrote the book, there are D3 rules, but I imagine you'd roll a D6 and half the score. You know. Right. And in fact, I wrote in the beginning, there's no such thing as a D3. Right. And then what happened? When they sourced the dice for the game, they found a D3 and they put it in. They are great, just to make me look stupid.
Nice.
Swines.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So there you go.
What advantage did moving to a collection of polyhedrals really give you? What challenges did it pose?
It's old-fashioned, really. I mean, it goes back to the old D&D,
sure, yeah.
and the original Rogue Trader and Warhammer all had polyhedral dice in. And the reason is that role-playing was so big in the late 70s and early 80s, and that's when a lot of these games were originated.
Right.
So we always used multi-sided dice, polyhedral dice. They were just part and parcel of our gaming repertoire. A lot of our box of dice always had lots of these dice in it. If you're a role player, they did. Later on, they tended to role-playing games became more sophisticated, and they tended to stick to either D100s, percentile dice, or D20s, or whatever. But at one time a day they were just normal, and I thought it'd be nice to get back to them. It's useful just to give you a different spread of results.
Right.
Yeah, and usually they're for random generation of casualties or hits. That's what I generally use them for. For all mechanical purposes, tests, I used a D10.
Mm-hmm. Great. And did you like did the D10's further range than the D6 really? You obviously leveraged a lot of it. Was that sort of have you been thinking about moving to a D10 for a while? Is it something you really want to try?
No, I'd had a set of rules in the back of my head with D10s for a long time, and I used D10s and D100s back in my design days before I joined Games Workshop. So I'd actually worked on about 3 or 4 games before I joined Games Workshop. So we kind of used D10s and D100s quite a lot. In the 1970s, I'm going back now. Go back, Mist of Time, special effect. Right. Okay, that's it. You got it. Oh yeah, I'm there. I'm wearing the flares.
The big collars are there. We get giant collars.
Yeah. Hey, wow.
Right.
And what happened was that these D6-based games, the old-fashioned D6-based games that were created by historical wargamers in the 1960s, had become very old-fashioned. By the 1970s, and D&D's come out, everyone's using polyhedral dice or D100s or T10s, and the idea of having a D6 and rolling 1 dice per man was really old-fashioned. So Warhammer was perceived as being when it came out, in 1982 it came out.
Right.
That was perceived as being really old-fashioned, and the mechanics were perceived as being dated. And we got, I was working obviously at Citadel at the time, and we got mail from people who'd write to us and say, "Really enjoyed Warhammer, but do you realise that modern war games are quite? I could rewrite this for you. And then people didn't realise that we were doing it deliberately. They thought we were just being ignorant. Right. We had no idea about contemporary wargaming developments, but of course it was deliberate because we wanted to aim a game at people that had D6s, namely youngsters. It was deliberately aimed at people in the mid-teens who were not necessarily dyed-in-the-wool historical wargamers.
Right.
So D6s became the thing, and Games Workshop evolved games that were based on D6s. There are 2 reasons for that. One of them was because it just became the house style, and I think people didn't think outside the box, didn't feel it necessary to do so. But on the other hand, D6s are cheap. You put a 20 D6s in a box, you've spent nothing. You put 5 D10s in a box, you've spent a lot of. From the point of view of putting a box of toy soldiers together, you've spent a lot of money. Those dice are probably costing you more to put in than those plastic sprues.
Wow.
Yeah, it's that sort of money. So that's the reason Games Workshop really didn't ever consider the sided dice as being necessary.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But you felt it was beneficial, worth the expense. You really wanted to bring Antares to a new place.
Just different. I mean, think of it like this. I spent 28 years at Games Workshop.
Right, you got to change something.
Let's do something different.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I've only got one more chance, I'm not going to have another 28 years of games design behind me. I'll probably be, if I'm still here in 28 years' time, I'll probably be a dribbling wreck, in God knows. Who knows? It could be anything. Let's do something different and actually go back and revisit it and do something that's different. It's the same with the background to Antares. I didn't want to repeat what I'd done before. I wanted to do something fresh and different.
Right.
Now I've been unshackled from the beast.
Well, nice. So let me ask you this. So another area I think you did some really interesting stuff here, especially if you come from maybe less so if you come from the historical side, because I think some of these mechanics exist in most historical games. But if you're coming from other sci-fi / fantasy games, I really like the hand-to-hand combat system in Antares, especially the fact that the point-blank range sort of event occurs, and then there's combat, and combat doesn't persist from round to round as it might in other games. It happens. There might be an additional round of bloodiness, and then it's over. What's some of your thinking behind the hand-to-hand combat system?
Well, originally I started off using the bolt action system by default, and the bolt action system is like that. It's you hit and you result. That's a very typically Alessio Cavatore system, because you don't have hanging over states into subsequent turns.
Right.
The thing is resolved.
Right.
And that's very typical of Alessio, and a lot of his games work like that. I think Kings of War does. And what it does is it means you don't have the complexity of having to calculate how things move during, say, shooting phases or missile phases or hand-to-hand phases. Whereas in a lot of my games, I tend to have shooting, fighting, and then movement all within a combat. And that means you have to have a lot of rules to cope with those things.
Right.
So in a way, it's to contain the way the rules splurge. But at the same time, I wanted something that was quite realistic, so I based it on what would happen in reality. I mean, you charge, you'd make an attack against a position, they shoot at you. You'd probably be firing as you go in. I mean, some weapons particularly designed to do that, automatic weapons, or whatever. Then generally speaking, what would happen would be troops would flee, run for it, or just break before they ever got into a bayonet fight or a hand-to-hand fighting.
Right.
But if they did, then that would tend to be resolved very quickly and very bloodily. And I think it's actually quite a realistic system. Yeah.
Well, I love that shooting occurs because I think that's something that makes it definitely a sci-fi game, right? Where almost like the swinging of the weapons also happens, but it's almost a secondary event, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, in fact, it doesn't often happen.
Yeah, right.
It happens more if you've got boromites and you want to use the lava mites, because that's primarily what they do. They're big chewy monsters.
Right.
So they have that, and some of the Algarin troops are much more hand-to-hand oriented as well.
Right. No, but I meant when you engage in a hand-to-hand, quite often the firefight will take care of it, and you don't often get into the actual hand-to-hand component.
That's right.
It's intriguing, and I like that a lot. And it feels more real and more sci-fi. That when you read sci-fi novels and you see sci-fi movies, unless you're talking Star Wars, there's not as much sword fighting really as as you generally get in sci-fi wargaming for some reason, where a lot of military doctrine seems to have gone backwards instead of forwards. And with this, it feels more realistic in the way it would play out with these kinds of weapons on a battlefield.
Yeah, I was trying to create something that was a credible representation of warfare on that scale. Star Wars is interesting because a lot of the battles in Star Wars are a bit like samurai movies, aren't they? Right. You just get hordes charging at each other, waving lightsabers and shooting each other. It's they don't have much in the way of tactics, but I wanted to create a game that had some tactical depth, not least because it's a game.
Right.
And players have to. If you have a game where you charge at each other and scream, then it's not a game, is it?
So before
it's something else. I don't know what it is.
Right. Before we move on from mechanics, there's one other thing. I think when someone plays Antares or has a demo, there's going to be sort of three big takeaways from them. One is sort of the drawing the dice from the bag. One is definitely the D10s instead of the D6s. But I think the third and biggest element is going to be that pinning element, right? So that idea that there's these pins that are on every single unit, and that pinning is actually more valuable and more critical than actually killing people in many ways. And it didn't take long into our second game where Craig and I realized, especially when you're fighting the guard. So in our first game, I had the worst. I could not roll anything besides a 10. So even to the point, Rick, just for your edification here, so he shoots a lucky shot in the Gar suit. Of course, the Gar suit rolls a 10, which means there's potential plasma explosion. Sure enough, 2 more guys die from that. I mean,
No, that's not true. You've never lost a guy to a lucky hit.
There was one.
You were just rolling 10s like a champ.
In any case, many men die. We won't quibble over how.
Many little goblinoids died, I believe.
Not goblins, Craig. We're moving away from goblins. But anyway, But in the second game, when my dice were more well behaved, and all of a sudden you couldn't kill a Gar suit to save your life,
saved my life, literally.
He suddenly, latched onto this mechanic. Well, if I can get a lot of pins on his guys, if I can get his pin count to his, to his command value, he's as good as dead. In fact, he is dead. So
he's dead, yeah.
So that's my new mission. And if I get lucky and kill one Gar suit along the way, it's even better because now more volume of fire does more pins because they're already down.
And the pinning is more impactful for the fewer models, so it's
So how did
my tactics change drastically?
And I know pinning comes from the historicals, when more historical games are really more into morale and psychology than many sci-fi games are nowadays. But give us some thinking on the pin system you built into Antares and where it came from.
Yeah, well, it did come from bolt action. Bolt action does have a pin system in it, but in bolt action, it's far more. It's more absolute. Whereas in Antares, the pins go on and come off more quickly, and I think of it as representing both suppressing fire, which is fairly. If troops are behind a wall and they're getting shot up, they keep their heads down. Right. They're going to be very reluctant to fire back and all that sort of thing. So it represents all that, but at the same time, pins also represent collateral damage onto things like the drones and onto vehicles. So to some extent, I'm using the pins as like a wound sink, and you can add pins and take pins away. And one of the orders in the game is to rally, which enables you to lose lots of pins all at once. But of course, you're losing a turn. I don't know if people play bolt action, then they'll be used to the way the pins work. But in Antares, when you give an order to something and succeed, you lose a pin. But if you give an order and fail, you also lose a pin. So as long as you can keep giving orders, that's to say allocating the order dice. As long as you can keep allocating order dice to a unit, you can get its pins back. So having one pin is never usually much of a problem. Having two you can cope with, but as soon as you get more than that, because a pin is a minus modifier on your own ability to give orders, you get to the position whereby you just stay down all the time. Because when you fail an order, you go down. You can't do anything else. So the more pins you've got, the harder it is to do anything. And you can just pin things out of the game. But that's intentional.
Right.
I know some people feel that that's kind of like, I can't do anything. Yeah, because you're making a commitment to keep stuff pinned down. But at the same time, the guy that's pinned down, all he has to do is take a turn out, give a rally order. When you give a rally order, you don't take pins into account, so it's much easier. You can lose I think it's D6 pins all in one go.
Yeah, right.
So you can basically get back on your feet again. And if you're a Gar, I'd imagine that's what you're going to be doing if you get a chance.
Right.
But you don't know if you're going to get a chance because the other guy's pulling his dice out of the bag. And if you're Gar, you've probably got fewer dice than he has. So the chances are you'll get hit and then hit again and hit again.
Yep.
Before you get a chance to, and that's the dynamic.
Yep, and I did lose a 3 Gar unit, or is it 2, Craig? I can't remember, but I lost a pretty good sized unit.
It was 2 by the time on that I had keyed into that.
Yeah, it was awesome. It's really cool, and I love the fact that the pinning affects your ability to return fire, your ability to react, and
the overall degrading of the.
You just feel the units falling apart, which is great. You're just really cool.
Yeah, I extended that from bolt action quite a bit because the stat range in Antares is much bigger. So I was able to apply it to different things, and particularly to the way that troops react, because the reaction system is unique to Antares.
Well, I think the reaction system. We should say one thing about that real quick. And I know we're going along. I appreciate your commenting.
Forbearance.
is I think the reaction system mitigates the idea. When Craig and I first started talking about this, we had never played bolt action. I've seen it played, and I know a lot of people that really enjoy it. So I know it's a well-loved system in the historical gaming realm. So I'm like, this is going to be cool. But one of the things I thought was, well, is the you-go-I-go gamer in me, the guy that's used to, War Machine and 40K, where I go and then you go, is it going to bother me that Craig could potentially pull out 3 units in a row and I don't get to do anything and I'm sort of sitting there stuck? And I believe the reaction system really mitigates that, because I can react if I haven't got an order yet. So now my whole army's just sitting there on the balls of its feet, like ready to rock. And let me see, bring it. I'm going to do something to you.
Yeah, that's right. And if you're close up, and let's say you're a unit that's really vulnerable, and suddenly you've been hit by something big, you can usually shoot back because there's a return fire reaction.
Right.
So even though chances are I'm dead man here, at least you can give some fire back.
Right.
And earn a little bit of respite.
Well, the great part was Craig had a whole unit of 3 units of C3 in these woods, and he gives that combined order. He's got the command squad there, so he gives the follow me order, and all his units are getting ready to go. And his first unit shoots at my unit of Gar that's 25 inches away. And their reaction is to scramble and run for cover, and they run behind the trees, and now the rest of his units can't see him. So now he's wasted a follow order, and the whole squad, and they're like, oh, now what do we do? Which is just great. Now
you turn around and you kill that other squad.
Well, yes, you do. You kill the other Gar squad. It was really frustrating, actually. But still, it was a great moment for a minute when his face was just like, what do I do now? Which is great.
Yes. And then I realized, wait a minute, there's an ambush order that you'll be seeing in action next time.
Yes, we have not effectively used the ambush order yet. We got to get on that.
That's a really useful order. Yeah. And often with the heavier weapons, the best thing is to get in a position and stay on ambush. Yeah. Because that just enables you to dominate the field, and it stops people moving about. But again, you are slightly at the mercy of the way the dice are drawn, because if your own troops all move first, you don't necessarily get the opportunity to ambush. If the other guy is forced to move by having a dice drawn, then you can take advantage. Yeah, it's all right. It's what I tried to do was create a system that mimicked, insofar as possible, how things would really happen. Mm-hmm. So you have a separate role to hit, and then you have a separate role for protecting troops. You don't have that in bolt action. You have that sort of thing in old-fashioned 40k, and you have it in Warhammer. But it just enables you to balance off things, things which are easy to hit but difficult to damage. And it just gives you so much texture to work with.
Really does. So, Rick, I know we're running along, but I just want to give a chance to kind of hear and you share with the listeners what's coming in the near future. So what can folks expect next from Warlord Games on Beyond the Gates of Antares?
Well, in terms of what I'm doing, I'm working on the first supplement. Okay. And that's going to take the Xylos Horizon story one step further. And it's a complete campaign. It's a campaign book.
Oh, nice.
And it's going to have more scenarios in, and they form a part of a narrative ladder. You don't have to play them. It'll also have new army lists in, and there'll be some new troop types for the different combatants. But I can't quite say what those are yet, because I can't say a super secret squirrel. And that's going to be the first major supplement for Antares, and I've still really got to work it all out. I've got it roughly in my head where I'm going, but I haven't started to pin any of it down yet.
Now, are you going the route of? I guess there's sort of two models. There's sort of the Games Workshop route, which is that every army gets its own army books, and that's how units expand, and it's one army at a time? Or are you going more of the route that was maybe pioneered by Privateer Press, which is there are supplement books that give a little bit of love to all the factions at the same time? Which way you guys feel like you're going on
that? More the latter. Okay. But really what I'm trying to do is I want to tell the stories. Okay. So I want to do scenarios primarily as a supplement. They're almost like campaign supplements.
Great. Okay.
So let's take a story in the Antarian universe and let's tell it. And sometimes the stories will link to each other.
Oh, very cool.
And what I'm hoping to do is in the first one, let's say it's a series of let's say 5 scenarios. It probably might be a few more than that, but let's say it's 5 scenarios. And each one of these will have a historical story behind it. So you're actually doing something that's equivalent to a refight. But the last one, I won't tell the result. And then we're going to run it as an online campaign through Warlord.
Oh, cool.
And the result will be determined by the online campaign.
Oh, very nice.
Very nice.
And then when I do the next supplement, that result will get incorporated into that. And then so on. And depending on how people do in that first supplement scenario set, we'll make specific characters, and if somebody feeds into our online system and does particularly well, we'll perhaps put that character into the model range and into the background.
Cool! That's awesome.
Is the idea?
Yeah. So a lot more, player engagement and player interaction. That's awesome. I love that. That's fantastic. Well, Rick, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us and give us all these great details on behind the scenes at Gates of Antares and where you guys are heading.
It's been great getting a chance to talk to you again, Rick. Thank you so much.
Lovely to talk to you guys again.
If people want to find out what you're up to or what Warlord Games is up to or more about Beyond the Gates of Antares, where should they go on the internet?
Well, there's a Facebook page for Beyond the Gates of Antares.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, there's both a public and a Warlord group, and they're both worth looking at. And I tend to spend a lot of time on there just checking questions out and answering people's queries.
You've been very active there, Rick. It's awesome. People ask questions, and you're right there with the answers. It's awesome.
I was also going to say you're very active on the Warlord forums too, where at Gates of Antares anyway, where I see you clarifying rules questions a lot, which is it's really nice having that feel that you're so accessible.
Oh yeah, well, I think it's a duty really. The other thing as well is that right at this moment, our translators are working on Antares for us. So we have French, German, I think Spanish, and various versions coming through. Well, of course, the translators can benefit from the errata. So if I've made a mistake, I say if I've made a mistake,
if it ever happens, come on.
If there are mistakes, I can let the translators know, and they can make sure the versions that are in French or whatever are all correct. Or to be more precise, only have new mistakes that the translators have introduced. Because they always do, and it's inevitable.
It's the human component.
Well, almost human, I tend to think, when you're looking at production people. And their mistakes in Antares, I look at some of them and go, that's funny, I don't remember getting that wrong. And I check my manuscript. My manuscript's right. The mistakes have been introduced during the production process, because it happens. When you're doing a lot of cut and paste for formatting, it's very easy to make mistakes, and it's very difficult for those to spot those. Curses. But I've done an errata, and that'll be online as well soon for people who are interested.
Great. So that's warlordgames.co.uk, I believe, and then there's also beyondthegatesofantares.com, and then there's, of course, Facebook as well.
That's right, and that should do. My own website is rickpriestley.com, but I've not actually done anything with that for years because I haven't had time. So I wouldn't. I should do something to it, but I'm afraid don't go there.
All right. Fair enough. Well, thanks again, Rick. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule, and have a happy holiday season.
Absolutely.
You too. And Merry Christmas to everyone in there in the radio land.
Merry Christmas.
This is Total Fangirl. Regular Jane most days, total fangirl when the moment strikes. Han shot first. Starbuck is a guy. And Lestat now stares a vampire. Hi everyone, this is Nicole, your Total Fangirl. You can follow me on Twitter at Nicole Wakelin and check out my blog, TotalFangirl.com. Our shout out is to all of our wonderful supporters over at Patreon. Head to patreon.com/the D6 Generation to support the show, and we thank you oh so very much. Today is Christmas Eve, and I am recording this as the last bit of work, anything work related remotely, that I am going to do for the remaining long holiday weekend. So what better thing to talk about than the most amazeballs movie that has just come out, and that would be Star Wars. No spoilers. You don't have to fast forward. I'm not going to spoil anything because I know not everybody everywhere has seen it yet. And I know even people here who just can't get tickets because the thing is sold out in some theaters locally, for us anyway, until January. So good luck. They'll see it next year. But we have seen it not just once, but twice. We went to see it once, when it first opened with the girls, and then we went to see it again in 3D and IMAX. And I hate 3D, but I love IMAX. And there was no non-3D IMAX, so I suffer. But I'll tell you what, this movie is so darn good, the 3D didn't even distract me. It doesn't really play into that much. So it was still totally fine to watch and did not make me want to poke my eyes out. what I think about the movie, it was amazing. It was exactly what I was hoping for. If you are a fan of Star Wars, like a real fan, like someone who randomly shouts, use the Force, Luke, anytime somebody is desperately trying to, make something work, you're going to like this movie. It is such a fan service film. There are so many callbacks to the original trilogy. It's wonderful. You're really going to enjoy it. And, you get to see the characters that you loved return. They're a little bit older, a little bit wiser, but they're still there. And it's wonderful to see them back on the screen. And we get some fantastic new characters too. You can see that they're introducing the next generation of Star Wars characters, and it's great. They actually really work really well, and it feels like Star Wars. I just wrote about this on my blog today, and I was trying to figure out why the second trilogy felt so wrong. Like, what was wrong with it? It was Star Wars. It was beautiful. I mean, some of the visuals for that movie, some of the CGI stuff, the worlds they created were just amazing. You can't deny it. They were great. Even if you hated the movies, they were great. But when we went back and looked at those, like when they came out, what we all kind of wanted was to revisit the place that we love, the Star Wars we loved. And I thought it's kind of like going to a restaurant. You have a favorite restaurant, but you haven't been there in a couple months. You're like, yeah, let's go back. And suddenly you go back and everything on the menu was gluten-free, dairy-free, and sugar-free. So it was the same stuff, but it didn't taste quite right. That's kind of what happened with the second trilogy. It was the same universe, but it wasn't quite right. And honest to goodness, I can say this time around, the sugar, the gluten, and the dairy are all back. It is amazing. It is a fun ride. It is the Star Wars that you remember from when you were a kid, if you're like me and you saw them for the first time in the theaters back in the 70s, or just the Star Wars you remember as being the good ones. So if you haven't seen the movie yet and you're wondering if all the hype is for naught, no, the hype is worth it. It is really good. You're going to enjoy the movie. Just grab yourself some popcorn, grab yourself some soda, sit back and enjoy going back to a galaxy far, far away.
Hey, and now it's time to talk about our friends at GeekNationTours.com. We've said it before, and we'll say it again here, that Geek Nation Tours is the ultimate way to travel if you are geekly passionate about anything. And all geek really means is that you love something so much that you really like to fully immerse yourself in it. And really, that's the definition of a Geek Nation tour. It is completely immersive in whatever the subject matter is. You just get to become one with that location, with all the things around it, and related to all the things you love. If you do a tour, if you do the Who's Your Doctor tour, for example, from Geek Nation Tours, you will see all things Doctor Who. And we'll go to a world-famous Doctor Who convention. Maybe you're just a miniature gamer and you love the miniature game and you want to go to Adepticon, but also see all the greatness that is Chicago and all the other geeky things around the area. Then the Adepticon 2016 tour is for you. Don't forget, you go to the Adepticon tour, you'll see Craig and I hanging out there. Also, of course, the Gen Con Tour 2016. Craig and I love to hang out with the Geek Nation Tour folks there. Always have a great dinner hanging out with Terrace and the folks there. So many cool tours. My daughter would love this one, the Harry Potter Tour coming up, seeing all the great Harry Potter locations in England. Man, just so many cool tours. If you want to check it out, also be sure to check out their general... when you go to the Geek Nation Tours homepage now, they've announced all kinds of cool, really cool programs. Beyond just Geek Nation Tours, there's Geek Elite, Geek Music, Sports Geek, and now Geek Kids, which I really think is fascinating. I can't wait to get Terrace back on the show to ask him more about this, but it's basically a non-profit element to Geek Nation Tours that really helps supports STEM, which of course is science, technology, and engineering and math with kids, gets tours designed for kids, working now with Buzz Aldrin's Share Space Foundation. Just really, really cool stuff happening in Geek Nation Tours, both great for you and the geek community as a whole and the next generation of geeks. Check it all out at GeekNationTours.com.
I'm Rafe Hollywood Granger, and this is the Hollywood Minute.
Welcome to the holiday edition of the Hollywood Minute with your host, Rafe Hollywood Granger. So if you want to be following me these days on gaming-related items, you want to follow me on the Twitter. I'm on the D6G Hollywood on Twitter. If you want to be following me for work-related stuff, and including my new podcast that I do once a month with a colleague of mine named Tim Roberts, it's on the BNI Power of One website. That's called The Power of One. And you can get the feed right from there or iTunes. And it's a business book podcast that I record once a month. All right, now on to all things gaming goodness. So, this year what I was looking forward to was getting the Shadows of Brimstone, which I sometimes call Shadows over Brimstone, just in case you hear me say that. But the Shadows of Brimstone, I bought the core set, City of Ancients. There's multiple sets. And I wanted to start at the beginning. Again, I had played this game with Pranav over on the Extra Life, and I just fell in love with it. So I busted out the components today and put together all the characters. I really do like the sculpts. I like how the characters go together. I'm looking forward to painting them. I have not put together any of the beasts yet. And I'm going to give the whirl of the beginning adventure again just to get the rules down with my youngest daughter, Emmy, who I know will enjoy playing the game. So we haven't done that yet. I wish I was taking the rest of the week off, but unfortunately I'm going back to work. You know, the owner of my business, boy, he's such a slave driver. Wink, wink. For those of you not in the no, I'm the owner of my own business. But yes, I'm going back to work for a couple days, and then I'll take the end of the week off. So looking forward to rolling that out. Was flipping through the rules, enjoying the color art. The producer of this game is Flying Frog Games, another FFG. Flying Frog Productions is their official game title. So they make, you've heard us talk about Last Night on Earth, and that's also a great zombie game. So anywho, looking forward to diving into that board game, and Dave Farr expressed an interest, and again, maybe Matt Alex or Andy or somebody of the other crew would want to give that a whirl. Got to get my 4 games in for 2016, right? Let's see. Also, doing a little bit more in Fallout 4. You know, it's a great game, guys. It's no doubt about it. It's a great game. But it's already starting to get that RPG slog for me. You know, when a game says it's on rails, I actually like it better. So this game being so open-ended, I'm starting to get that lost in the world feeling, or that feeling of like just kind of continuing to go and then, you know, kind of basically like kill monsters, loot them, get better armor, rinse, repeat. But it's still fun. There's no doubt about it. Dave Farr was also talking about getting a group of people together for the Rainbow Six Siege. I love Rainbow Six games. I do a lot better with slow-paced shooters than fast shooters. Looking forward to that. I've not downloaded the game yet, and I'm kind of bummed because my wireless headset is missing a piece that I need to be able to chat wirelessly. So I'm sort of bummed about that. Speaking of that, in case I end up getting a whole new headset, does anybody have out there good headsets that they like that work well with Xbox and or maybe even watching TV with headsets? So if anybody has a good recommendation, I'll take those. And let's see, what else am I looking forward to? Playing D&D this Tuesday. Super looking forward to that. It's been a long time since we've had a game just due to the holidays and different breaks there. So really looking forward to that and getting the gang back together. And then the way it'll work is we'll have to play, not half, but we'll get the opportunity to play again. So it'll be 2 weeks in a row. So that'll be pretty cool. Oh, yeah, this was fun, too. Had a chance to record with the other boys, that being Matt Alex, Ian Clark, Dave Farr, and old Andy over there at the Nerd Herders. They were kind enough to invite me onto their year-end show where they talk about what they did over the year, what they're looking forward to in the beginning of the year. And we had a nice discussion about Star Wars. We had all each seen Star Wars, and so we had a fun discussion about that. And I actually have a dissenting view that surprised me, myself. Not the view I had, but the fact that I had a dissenting opinion. So we talk about that a little bit over there. I recommend you go check it out over there on the Nerd Herders. Hoping you guys like the predictions episode. It's fun to always kind of listen to that back and then see how the predictions are going to go. And let's see what else. Oh, another hobby I've been enjoying of late is brewing my own coffee. And Doc was doing the pour-over coffee method, where you brew your coffee, you weigh the beans out, you put you can change the depth of the grinding. And I've been really enjoying it. And then you get a tea kettle and you pour the hot water over the coffee, and you use just the right amount of water, and it's been fun. So I have a scale, and I weigh the water and test the different waters, basically levels that I like, and try out lots of different beans. I'm doing a coffee bean subscription with a company called Counterculture, and they ship me my coffee once a month, and it's in a variety of beans. You don't pick the beans; they pick whatever's growing fresh at the moment. So there is a bit of randomness there, but I've been enjoying it. I've had my first batch, and then my wife just gave me a great set of beans, roasted up in Portland, Maine, and they're from Santa Barbara, Honduras, El Solito, and that bean has been really good. As a matter of fact, as I'm talking about it now, I feel like going and brewing myself a cup. So I'm excited about that. It's a fun hobby. So, like I said, kind of hand grinding, not hand electronic grinding, but personal grinding the beans and experimenting with the different flavors and the different amount of water to use and stuff like that for a good, nice, fresh brewed cup of coffee. So that's been a lot of fun. And lastly, what I want to talk about for my MOBA dreams and desires, been playing a little bit of the Heroes of the Storm, which is the Blizzard game, and I've been enjoying that as well. Just getting into it. Greg Ivany plays it, and so he said, "Hey, Rafe, why don't you give it a whirl?" So just kind of learning the characters over there. It's in the vein of League of Legends, which I played every now and again. I wasn't an expert on it at all, but this has been fun. Heroes of the Storm. You play the different characters from the Blizzard universe, so I've been enjoying that. All right, until next time, hope everybody, again, continues to have a good holiday season. The next holiday here will be the New Year. Get lots of gaming in. And, again, if you want to follow me on Twitter, it's the D6G Hollywood on Twitter. If you want to follow me work-related, go out and check out my podcast on thepowerofone.com. You'll find the feed there, or the podcast name is The Power of One, and then look for the podcast called Tim and Rafe's Reads. Or if you want to follow me work-related, I'm Rafe Granger on Twitter. Again, until next time, happy gaming.
This is the Dice Tower Network at dicetowernetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. Well, Rick had to leave us, busy guy, something about launching a whole new game or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's okay. With him gone, Craig, it's always very awkward to review a game with the designer, manufacturer, whomever in the room. It just doesn't really work.
Yeah, we learned early on not to actually do that.
So we don't like to do that. So it's better. This is great because now we've got a full featured Antares episode with the designer talking about that stuff. And then now that he's left the room, Craig and I can dish on the good, bad, and indifferent that is Beyond the Gates of Antares. I'll let you know, really think about it, and you can be the judge yourself with a patented D6G detailed review to understand all the mechanics and really decide if it's the kind of game for you, right?
Yep.
So let's get started with the high-level overview. So this is what Craig and I call, and I know there's debates about this, but Craig and I would call this an army-scale miniature war game. So when we say that, we mean that it's squad-based, meaning that you are commanding squads at a time. Squads activate and work together. We are talking about there's usually some kind of command unit elements. There's infantry unit elements. There are vehicle and support artillery unit elements. And so you feel like you're commanding a multiple component army, right, Craig?
Correct, yes.
Yes. So this is not Infinity, where you've got, a few models in a squad sneaking around buildings, or War Machine. War Machine's kind of evolved over time, so maybe it's a little more like this. But this is very much, it's not Malifaux. This is very much large-scale battles.
No, this is squad on squad.
In a future, what I would call it a hard sci-fi future. So this is not the grim darkness of the far future. This is more like, but it's not Star Trek either. It's not all happy.
No,
it's somewhere in the middle. It's somewhere in the more traditional sci-fi though areas you find.
Yeah, I mean, it's got some weirdness in it, but most of it is it tries to be science based.
Like there's no magic. There's magic-like effects, but it's because there's clouds of nanobots flying around, and not because there's any kind of all-encompassing force or anything like that.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much the game. There are we'll get into the details about the factions and the rules and everything else. The starter sets and actually the game itself just really launched. I know Rick mentioned earlier that they were releasing parts of it ever since the Kickstarter back in kind of didn't really execute all the way in 2013. They've been releasing small elements. But the big kickoff, I would say, Craig, of the game and seeing it in stores now and getting it really launched was last November. So November 2015, it really launched. The starter sets came out. And for $99, you got the rule book. And in the initial print run, you got hardcover rule books. You got a bunch of guys for the C3 faction. You got a bunch of guys for the GAR faction. You got some cool blast markers, right? Plastic blast markers.
Yeah, plastic blast markers, plastic templates.
Yeah, and these blast markers are three-dimensional. They stand up like little explosions next to your guys on the table because this game, those who played Epic way back in the day will remember this mechanic. And this game really features a morale and unit cohesion and all that stuff is a big part of this game. And so you really get to have visual element of how much suppression's happening on a unit is right there with those cool markers. So, and also you get a bunch of dice. This game is actually D10 driven.
It is indeed, and you get a lot of those, but it also has a lot of D6s, Russ.
It has a lot of D6s. It has a lot of custom D6s, which are special order dice. We'll get more of those later. It also has a bunch of regular D6s and a bunch of other regular polyhedral dice, including, for me, never before seen D3. An actual D3, not a D6, a D3, which looks sort of like right.
Indeed,
exactly. So let's jump into the details here on some of this stuff, and I think the best place to start, Craig, is that rulebook.
Okay, well, that rulebook is amazing, Russ, for a couple different reasons. Some of them good, and at least one of them not so good. 260 pages, full color, hardcover. As you said, in the original print run of the starter, I believe it's going to soft cover when they do a second run. But right now, your box set's going to come with a book that would cost you quite a bit of the $100 price tag of that starter set would go just to this hardcover book for all their games. So it's a really good deal. If you flip through it, you're going to see an awful lot of miniature photography. Mm-hmm. Most of the artwork is miniature photography. Some of it is really cool renderings and sort of digital schematic pictures of weapon systems and things like that. So there's a lot of cool stuff like that. And then there's some standard artwork. Some of it is beautiful, and some of it is reminds me of Rogue Trader, like some of the not great stuff. And of course. Rick actually told us why, like how expensive the art was, and that they couldn't really afford all top rate art. But there's still some beautiful, evocative art in here. You find a great, enormous, and comprehensive table of contents with a lot of fluff. Unfortunately, Russ, what do you not see in the book?
Sadly, one of my pet peeves: there is no index.
Huge pet peeve because it's a huge. First of all, it's huge, 260 pages. Second of all, it does that thing that the old 40K rule books used to do, where the fluff and the rules are all intermingled. So you don't know exactly where you have to look for the thing you're trying to look for. And when there's no index, it really can bog. Now, the good news is the rules are very clearly written, and for the most part, you're not flipping through a lot for the rule. I mean, I think we reached for the rule book maybe 3 or 4 times in our third game.
Yeah.
But not having an index is a huge hit on any game rule book that's more than 10 pages. Yeah. And this one being 260, it really takes a hit on that.
I mean, the good news is the bulk of the game mechanics are in the first 50 pages. So that's the good news. The bad news is, so it's good news, bad news, right? It's a very enjoyable book to read through cover to cover. Because as Craig said, the background material and the fiction is intermingled with the mechanics. But also, when they present, like, the rules for the weapons, they actually present, like, cool little... as Craig mentioned, the actual renders the artist used for the three-dimensional modeling of the models, like they took the render of the weapon the model was carrying and put it right into the book, so it looks like a little digital readout of the weapon next to how the weapon works, both the fluff and the stats. Now, they organize these weapons alphabetically, but they organize them by type. So there's range weapons, then there's heavy weapons, and there's close combat weapons, and then there's grenades, and then there's... So what that does is that you got to remember that you're looking up the disruptor cannon. You got to remember, is that artillery? Oh, no. That disruptor cannon is actually a direct fire weapon. Oh, no, wait. It's a point blank weapon. It may be so you don't remember. You got to look in 3 or 4 places to find, or if you've got your model and you're looking at your unit and you're seeing my model is carrying, a disruptor, a blaster, and this, whatever the other thing is, I have to understand what those are and look in the right section of the book to read their stats. Right?
Yeah.
Or if I had an index, or if they're organized a little differently. So it's one of those things. It's just unfortunately not a great reference book.
Right.
Now, tools like Army Builder and others will help us out with this, but at the moment, with things being all brand new, that's my only point of frustration. Really, is the reference material. That said, the rules are very, very clear. And Craig, every time you and I had to look something up, there was never a debate between you and I about how the rule worked.
Right.
We always found that the rules were very clear on the situations we ran into. It was really just a matter of finding them quickly. It was more like flip.
Yep.
Oh, there it is. Oh, look, it's right here. It's very clear. We know exactly what to do, but it was a lot of flipping, right?
Right. Yeah.
I will say this. They did a great job with the resources they had. I don't think the rule book does not feel cheap to me at all. It does not feel like it was put together by a newbie company, which, of course, Warlord Games is not.
Right.
But it doesn't feel that way at all. It feels like a nice hardcover a book put together by a veteran company, and I don't feel. I mean, yes, it doesn't have the artwork in there of Privateer Press's Matt Wilson or anything like filling every other page, or Games Workshop with an army of artists, but it does look nice, and it does really give you a good feel for the armies, the universe, and the gameplay.
Right. Yep.
So I think the rulebook is definitely worth the price of being baked into the $100 box set when you consider all the plastic you're getting in there.
Right. And I believe I think the price of the rule book is I think it's at a $50 price point.
Hardcover? Really?
For the hardcover,
That's a
I
good
believe.
price. That's a good price.
Yeah. So it's undeniable. I mean, it does have that massive drawback, but beyond that, I mean, it's really good.
Yeah. So if we're talking quality, and for miniature war games to be successful, we talked about this before, you got to have good rules, I think. And people will debate this, but I think you do. There's a reason they debate. It's the elephant in the room. But the second part of this is you really, obviously, it's a miniature war game. You got to have good models. So, Craig, let's talk about those models. What did you feel like when you first started digging into those models that came in the starter set?
Well, it's interesting, Russ. When I looked at the models, my first thought was $48 for the rulebook. I thought the models looked cool, and then I looked at the little pamphlet that the starter box comes with on how to put them together, and it uses graphics from like the renders. And they don't have any detail, and they're kind of smooth, and they're kind of featureless. And I thought, oh no, these are going to be like, I mean, longtime listeners will know that when I painted the Hawk War Games Drop Zone Commander models, that was my big problem with them, was the models lack a lot of detail. And the cool factor of those models was in the fact that they had professional painters paint them and add all kinds of shading and stuff that wasn't actually on the model itself. And I went, oh my God, is this going to be lots of like empty space? And it wasn't. There's every little square centimeter has lots of detail, and the armor is all different and segmented, and you've got little grenades on the belts, and the helmets are really cool. And so yeah, I thought, I mean, they're great plastics. I mean, they're not GW. They're not, as posable as GW plastics are today, but they're still very cool, and they're still more posable than you'd think. I think yours are far more posable than mine. I think you have actual like ball joints that you can work with.
Yeah, so the Gar are like these 3-legged robots, where the Gar's main battle unit is the Gar are actually little short dudes, short humanoids, but they pilot these large, oversized robots that have 3 articulated legs, and then. So they're sort of crab-like bodies and these claws and gun arms. And the legs are very posable. So the legs are ball joints, 3 ball joints, and then you have the actual leg mechanic itself is actually on a pivot joint, so you can actually get some pretty good angles on that too. And so I had a lot of fun posing my guys, and I was actually surprised by. And then the heads are detached as well. I have a choice of 3 different heads for each model, and then I can also rotate the head. So what's really cool is as I model the model actually tilted for whatever reason, because I'm, let's say, I'm stepping over a big rock or something. You can adjust the head so the head's level, and head angle and head position really goes a long way to making the model look right when you look at it. Mm-hmm. And so being able to have the bodies rocking but adjust the head to matter, or to be able to angle the head so it's looking the right way, gives you a lot of cool poses and gives you more flexibility, because if the head was solid into the body, you would be, anytime you modeled it in a strange angle, the head would be at a strange angle too, and it would look not natural. Uh-huh. So I really like the poses. I like them a lot. I love the models. And Craig, I'm right there with you. The detail on these guys are fantastic. They're real plastic models. I was using polystyrene cement, so I get the nice, great, quick to put them together, but you have that little bit of time to kind of adjust the angles just so to get those cool poses. I am very happy. I'm having a blast painting these things. I haven't had this much fun painting models in a long time, probably since I first discovered, War Machine-ish era. The Infinity models I also loved at this level. And they're well known as being some of the best, but they're all metals. So these are great being plastics. The Malifaux models at this level too. I think, there's certain details of those other models, certain extreme poses they've got that Antares doesn't have yet. But again, these poses are very dynamic. The models are all in poses that, I think most of the range I look at it for all of the factions look really, there's a lot of dynamic poses, not just standing there.
Right. Now, we should mention that the only plastics they have right now are for the Gar and for the Concorde. Right. Everybody else, all of their models are metal. And one issue that I do have a little bit with the game is that the price, because it's a small company, and it is a very small company, as you heard Rick say, they don't have the money to use the economy of scale to bring down the price a lot. I think that's why it is. But right now, when you're looking at like $32 is a little steep for a. Currently, if you get them right now, they made a mistake and they packed everything in boxes of 5 or 6. And what they want to do is they wanted to pack them in boxes of 7. So if they didn't change the prices, you're going to get a couple more models in most of those boxes. But the prices on the metals are a little steep. But I just got my first metals this week. And looking at them, the metal models are beautiful also. And although I don't like working with metal as much as I used to, and I much prefer plastic nowadays, I am looking forward to getting these models painted up put together and painted up, because they're the only options I have for these units. But their stated goal right now is to have troop choices for all 6 of the factions available as soon as possible in plastics. So I think that will make the game even more affordable. And hopefully they had army starters when they first came out about a month ago, which because of the little snafu with the model count in the boxes, they cut short. But hopefully they'll get those back up soon, and it'll be more economical to start an army. But the quality of the models is great. And of course, we're looking at vehicles hopefully, and then somewhere in this next year, not in the far distant future, which will be primarily resin and metal add-on bits. But Rick did mention that they're already starting to work for some plastic vehicles as well. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, and I think again, I think their primary goal, in addition to good-looking models, was to get 6 factions out of the door at the same time. And I think to do that, it probably was more expensive than they would like. And it probably also you couldn't do everybody in plastic at the same time. Just to the cost, right. We know that the expense of setting up plastic molds is very high. So I think it was a good choice. If they can get 6 factions out that all look cool, and there's already other factions that are calling to me, and I'm exercising extreme restraint to stay focused.
Yeah, me too. And I feel myself weakening.
So they're doing something right if I'm already looking at other factions, even though I'm still loving the one I have now. So But let's not jump ahead, though. Before we get to the factions.
Yes.
Let's talk a bit about the universe and the fluff. And, Craig, this is your bailiwick. So, what's going on in the Antares Nexus?
Well, it's interesting. You should ask, Russ. The story, I need a good story to work with my war games. I think a lot about like the narrative and the world that the fighting is happening in, and the people who are fighting and why are they fighting. And I need a cool story to go with that. And they've really, Rick Priestley has really done that with Beyond the Gates of Antares. So the game revolves around this thing called the Antares Nexus, which we know of as the star Antares. But as it turns out, the star Antares is not actually a star at all. It's a giant engine that was created by this race that nobody knows. They disappeared millions and millions of years ago. They're just known as the Builders now because they built this giant thing, and it's actually older than our sun. This machine, and this machine is it's a star. It's the Antares star, but it's not really a star. It's this engine, and what it is it's a collection of millions of wormholes, each one of which goes to a most of them are habitable systems with habitable planets on them. And so thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years ago, humans eventually using slower than light ships, because we don't have faster than light ships, they eventually made it to Antares, and they started to colonize through these wormholes, and it was great, and they colonized all these planets, and they ran into some aliens, and that was cool too. But then something happened, and nobody knows why, and nobody knows how the giant Antares Nexus engine works, but it sucks all the wormholes back into the star. And when they go into the star, they're no longer accessible. And when they go into the star, all the wormholes collapse, and all of those planets and systems are separated. And then over a few hundreds or thousands of years, and it always seems to be random, the wormholes reemerge on the surface, and you can actually travel across the surface of the Antares to go from one wormhole to the next, and that's how they do interstellar travel. But when they emerge, they're completely rearranged. So planets that used to be neighbors are no longer neighbors. Empires that used to be all cohesive are now scattered all over the place. So every time you have one of these collapses and collapsings and regenerations, there's a huge political shift that has to happen, and you have to rearrange. You have alliances that have to rearrange themselves, and so like these civilizations will develop, and they'll spread through thousands or even hundreds of thousands of planets over thousands of years, and then the whole thing collapses and they have to start over again. In the game, Beyond the Gates of Antares, it's considered now we're in the 7th age, so it's the 7th iteration of the Nexus since humans have discovered it. So thousands and thousands and thousands of years have gone by. Humans predominate. They're almost all of the people that you'll meet are humans, but they've diverged drastically genetically in some of the places. So there are Terran standard humans, and then there are humans that have gone maybe a little different, like the Algoran look mostly human, but they've got like scales on their heads and their arms to protect themselves from the terrible heat of the sun. And you've got the Boromite guilds who they developed when they were isolated on these really hostile, inhospitable, high-gravity worlds. So they're big, hulking, bulky guys who look kind of like trolls almost. But they're all basically human. And, of course, you've got the Gar. The Gar who are genetically engineered to be little goblinoid little guys. They were humans. They're still human genome, but now they're like these little goblinoid guys. And then this shadowing everything is this mysterious race called the Vorl, who are terrible aliens that you know almost nothing about. They pop up every now and then in the mentions, but we don't know what their deal is, and we don't know like who they are, what they want, other than the fact that they fight everybody, including themselves. Yeah. So that's the basics. And Beyond the Gates of Antares is called that because at the very beginning of the game, where the players start to enter the storyline, and Rick already said, explain, and this is all on their website and the Facebook page and everything, that it's going to be, this is a living game system that's constantly going to be evolving. Their plot lines are moving forward. It sounds almost like a guy who created an awesome world and then a game company forced him to freeze it in place for 30 years. I don't know. That might just be me. And the first ever planet or system that has 2 wormholes in it has been discovered, called the Xylos system. And in the Xylos system, the physicists have figured out only one wormhole in each system the Antares nexus can only create one wormhole in each system, and there's some mathematical equation to figure out where it's supposed to be. And in Xylos, it was in the wrong place, and they didn't know why, and they had to send all kinds of probes out, and all the different factions started to realize there was this weirdness going on, so they all started to send probes and then fleets to try to figure out why the wormhole was in the wrong place in the Xylos system. And at the very end of the rulebook fluff, you realize, or they tell you that a new wormhole that leads to a totally different place has been discovered. And so everybody's now fighting over it to try to figure out, does it lead to another nexus? Does it lead to another galaxy? Nobody knows. And that's what's happening. That's why it's beyond the Gates of Antares, because all of these warp gates now are civilization. Everybody knows about those, but there's this new gate and nobody knows where it's going.
There you go. So there's the world, or the universe, or galaxy, depending how you look at it.
Yeah.
So, and you mentioned a little bit, Craig. You gave some hints as to which factions are battling over there.
Yes.
Now I'm gonna time lock you here to 30 seconds of faction.
30 seconds of faction.
30 seconds of faction. Here you go. Give us the rundown. There are 6, and only stick to the 6 available factions that are available today. I know this, like the Vorl were mentioned, but they're not actually out.
No,
yet.
they are not. No, so, nobody knows what they even look like.
Right. So stick to who are the 6 playable factions that have models available now.
Okay.
Go. 30 seconds of faction. Go.
Okay, I'm going to cheat. The Panhuman Concord and the Isaurian Synatex are 2 different factions, but for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and at least 3 of the ages of Antares, they were one giant empire. They were the largest human empire in existence, and they are completely super high tech. Every planet has its own nanosphere, which is an artificially created atmosphere of nanites that you can't see, you can't sense, but they're all there. All their technology works on these nanites. The nanites help the people. The nanites kind of read your mind and tell what you want. So they don't even have governments. It's basically the machines. It's called the integrated machine intelligence that is all of the people and all of their wants and desires and all of the machines all working together to figure out what's best for society and what's best for the majority of society. So that's how the society, the Isaurian Concord worked. Then, sadly, during one of the times when the gates were closed, the Isaurians, who were basically the capital of this giant Concord, came in contact with some alien intelligence and its computer systems, corrupted their integrated machine intelligence, so that when they tried to get back with everybody else, when all the gates emerged again, the mainstream Concord intelligence saw the Isaurians as somehow corrupted and enemy, and so now they're fighting. So now they're 2 separate factions, and the Panhuman Concord is very clean cut and very, very high, hard sci-fi looking, and the Isaurian Synatex are very sort of like organic looking, because they've been influenced by this alien technology and this alien DNA, sort of.
Right. And the Panhumans, the Concord there, they are heavy drone users.
Oh, yes, they love both factions.
A lot of drones flying around there as models in their units. In fact, there's a lot of core rule mechanics around drones in this game. Gun drones.
Almost everybody
uses
uses little buddy drones, so all your infantry units can have all kinds of little drones zipping around them.
So tell us about the Algoran guys, and I like to call the Algorans the Mass Effect faction, because these guys' armor looks like it's right out of Mass Effect, which makes them very, very appealing to me. So what's up with the Algorans, Craig?
Yeah, the Algorans are very cool. They're a very martial race. They're humans, but the Algor, their planet, is very hot and inhospitable, and they grew these scaly protrusions on their heads and their forearms and their shoulders, where the sun would be beating down. And they're very upright. They're very honorable. They're very in a heavy armor. They're very boxy looking. They also use drones a lot, but they use more drones for like the buddy drones. They don't use a lot of weapon drones and things like that, I don't think. But they're kind of like good guys. I would say they're probably the closest to, because the Panhuman Concord, you're kind of like, what's going on with that machine intelligence that's telling everybody what to do? And the Algorans don't have an integrated machine intelligence, really. They use nanites also. That's pretty much standard technology for everybody who's up to the minute, classic baseline technology now. But they're, for the most part, they're they're very martial because their empire borders are their prosperate. It's called the Algoran Prosperate. It borders on the wormholes that have been taken over by the Gar Empire.
Exactly, my boys.
Your boys.
Yeah. So the Gar, we've talked about them already, but they're basically genetically engineered creatures for war. They have no culture at all. They are all short little humanoids, kind of goblin-esque, if you will. But they pilot these big ancient technology battle suits, and that's where all the weaponry comes from. Everything's plasma-powered, which is unreliable in some ways, but more reliable in others. So there are actually weapons designed to disrupt the nanobots of the other factions, and throw them off. But the Gar are immune to this because they don't use any nanobot technology at all. So while their plasma is volatile and it's not as predictable and results in things like randomizations for its power and things like that, the good news is it's hard to stop. So you really got to stop in the old-fashioned way, blasting them. There's no little fancy tricks to slow the Gar down.
No, there are not.
So what I like about the Gar is they are one of the more unique looking factions of the bunch because everyone else is a flavor of human, and the Gar are really, because their majority of their army is robots. They're bipedal. All their vehicles are walkers, and it's a little different thing. Most of the factions are hover vehicles.
They're giant battle suits.
One thing about the Gar that's a little, if you like drones, don't play the Gar. The Gar have virtually no drones, and they have one drone unit.
Well, they have flitters, right?
Yeah, the flitters are one drone unit though. They don't have the attachments. They don't have all the cool gear with the gun. Their drones have no weapons on them. They don't have any shield drones. All that cool stuff's for the fancy new technology races. The Gar don't show themselves with that stuff.
No.
What about the Freeborn, Craig?
Well, the Freeborn, I didn't know where the Freeborn fit, Russ, and I'll tell you, I didn't really like the Freeborn until very recently, like yesterday. And what happened yesterday was I've been haunting around the forums, the official
Antares forums?
Warlord forums, the Antares forums. And they have two different forums about modeling and stuff like that. And somebody had just posted up one picture of one Freeborn model, and I was like, okay, I'm sold. Because they are the Fremen.
Oh, yes, right.
Yeah. They're not their fluff, but their models, if you look at them, their official paint schemes are all blues and turquoise and very bright, and I didn't like it. This person painted theirs all in muted greens and browns and a little black, and I was like, oh my god, they're the Fremen. The story of the Freeborn, they're called the Freeborn because they are free of the integrated machine intelligence. They live on giant city-sized spaceships. They are all nomadic, and they are basically the masters of interstellar space travel. Pretty much everybody else, they have war fleets and stuff like that, but for shipping and passenger travel, pretty much everyone depends upon the Freeborn. And the Freeborn do not bow down to the Panhuman Concord or the Isaurian Senetex, and so they're kind of like on their own. They train themselves up as warriors. They actually have mercenary companies that they rent out to other people. So they're known for their martial discipline and their focus because they're the guys who do all the transportation for everybody, and they also do a lot of manufacturing themselves. They have access to all of the latest technology that everybody else uses. So they have units that have very advanced weapons and units that have that are cheaper that have access to less advanced weapons. So they're probably got the most different choices for their infantry. They're all human, but they've got all kinds of weird like cranial implants on their models that look really cool. And so they're kind of like the rebels. They're not really rebelling against anybody, other than the fact that when the Panhuman Concord or the Isaurian Senetex meets you, it's in the integrated machine intelligence does everything it can to take over your data sphere, because that's what it does. And so there's all kinds of things, procedures in place with the Freeborn that they don't let the Concord or the Senetex near them as far as the data spheres go, so they don't get corrupted. Because once they get in there, it just happens automatically, and you become a happy member of the Concord,
right,
or the Senetex. And then the last group are the most intriguing visually. I don't know that they're really my style, but they look really kind of cool. They're very War Machine or Hordes trollish looking almost, in that they've got like giant growths all over them. And they're the Boromite guilds, who are basically workers and miners and craftsmen, and they work in big family units and things like that, and they will go to war when they have to, and they use all kinds of really cool compactor technology that basically shoots little singularities at you that crushes you and all the cover that you're in. So cover doesn't matter to their weaponry because it just kind of crushes everything around it. And they're very low tech also. They're very into hand to hand, and they're the ones that the Freeborn use some alien animals as troop types and as mounts and stuff, but the Boramites really have like a whole race of allied alien creatures that work with them called the lava creatures, and there's giant ones like the Brood Mother, and there's little ones like the lava mites, and so they've got all kinds of weird wacky little creatures that go to war with them when they go to war. So kind of cool opportunities that are a lot more organic than any of the other factions.
Yeah, and I think I think you can see from their website that the factions do look very different. So
Yeah.
even though,
Absolutely.
even though when we say they're all, most of them or all of them really are some sort of human variants, the variants are very distinctive, and so you don't really. It feels more like the Star Trek races where they're all
Right.
humanoids have been changed slightly with makeup, but they look very different, and I think they're going to play very differently. Just judging by how differently the Gar and the C3 play, which is the Concord, the Panhuman Concord, it's completely different. I mean, you cannot play the same way with the Guard that you play with the Concord. It just won't work. No. And the other factions, just reading through their rules and their unit choices and their options, I think it's going to be the same. Craig, how do you feel about it?
I think they're great. I think they each have different technology. They have different the points for the squads themselves are different enough that you're going to have more Freeborn than you have Concord. Actually, most other than the Gar, I think you're going to have more of almost anything than the Concord. They're kind of the Space Marine-y kind of. They've got good armor. They've got good weapons. They've got good technology. They're kind of like on the cutting edge of all that stuff. Whereas everybody else is sort of a little step down, maybe, but then they have cool things to offset that. They're maybe better in hand to hand. Everybody's armor works different, which is cool. Mm-hmm. So your armor all works basically the same way, but then have these cool little side rules that make them different. So that makes all the different races different. And the force organization, well, what would be force organization in Warhammer 40,000, what they call the force selector in Beyond the Gates of Antares, it's different for every army. So where the Gar might have a certain number of troops necessary and then a certain number of support, strategic and auxiliary available to them, everybody's is different. Mm-hmm. So those force selectors are going to force you, no pun intended, to go in a certain direction as far as how you're going to wait. Like the Panhuman Concord, I love the gun drones. The weapon drones, but the weapon drones are a support choice. And my force selector forces me to take way more troops than other people I think generally have to take before I can start having support choices. So I have to focus on the men. The men need to be the core of the army, and everybody is different based on those the force selector.
That's right. I think there's a lot of difference there. I'm looking forward to trying against my hand against other things. The other thing too we should say is that the weapons in this game are very different. Yeah. Even inside the same faction and other factions, it's not like everybody's got a flavor of plasma gun and they're all sort of the same, or that their stats are slightly tweaked. Like their actual effects are different as well, and so you actually get the flavor of the weapons that people carry right in the armies as well, which is really, really cool. So let's talk about building your forces here. And Craig, you already alluded to this. So there's this, they call them force selectors, but there's essentially an organizational structure to armies. And in addition to being limited to for points, like most game systems do, you're also limited by choices from the various elements of your organization. So you're limited to you have to have a certain number of tactical choices, not more than or less than, a certain number of support, a certain number of strategic, and a certain number of auxiliary, right? And based on the point value of your game, that's how those are going to break down. And they're different by faction, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So your tactical is your basic troops. Mm-hmm. Support is like your elites. And it doesn't break down, like 40K broke it down into sort of artificial chunks. These are far more, you can kind of tell that there's a that Bolt Action, which is the World War II game that Beyond the Gates of Antares is borrowing a lot of its rules from. So there's a more realistic, hardcore military structure to everything than I'm usually used to in my sci-fi games. And so you've got your tactical support, strategic, and auxiliary, and those are options available to you. But the cool thing is, unlike most of these other games, like in some of your point values, you are forced to take some support, or you might be forced to take some auxiliary, because theoretically at that level, with that many men on the field, your command structure would not let you go out there without some kinds of support. So it's a very cool sort of structures it, and tweaks to this table would allow Warlord and Rick Priestley to do different army lists or different themed army lists for different situations or campaigns or things like that. Very cool.
Mm-hmm. Now, what's also cool about this is, and a lot of games have been getting away from this, there are a lot of unit options when you buy your units. So in addition to the fact that you got a point limit and you got to buy certain units from certain elements of your force selector, you've also got options for every single unit. And these options are more than just how many guys are in the unit. So for GAR, for example, while you can add, it's a unit of 3 suits, you can add 2 more of these powered plasma suits, obviously as an option, but you can also add things like plasma amplifiers, which are actually add a lot more complexity and options to the unit, or you can add plasma dumps to the unit, or you can upgrade your leader so that he's more resilient. And there's all these little things that could be represented on the model if you wanted to model it as well, kind of reminiscent of what was called War Gear from the Games Workshop line. So you have a lot of those cool options again. So there's a lot of places you can spend those points, and it's very easy to get sucked into making your unit super elite and going with a low unit count in the game versus going with more units that have less flexibility and cool gee-whiz stuff. But what you're going to find when we get to the mechanics of the game, that unit count, the number of units in your army, is a very, very important element of the game. And so you're really going to be struggling with, how do I maximize the units in my army and still get all the tactical options on my units I need?
Yeah, absolutely.
And last but not least, they got this nice generic set of things you can buy for your army that are low point values, generally ranging between 5 and 15 points. And by the way, we should say a typical game size, 500 points is the smallest game you can play, and it's going to feel like a starter-sized game.
Yeah.
I think 750 and 1,000 points is really where the sweet spot's probably going to be, probably closer to 1,000. But 750, yeah, I think so. You think it's going to be bigger than that?
Nah, yeah, I would say like 1,500 is
maybe
probably going to.
Cool.
I would think, yeah,
that'd be awesome. Because for GAR, I mean, I'm going to get to 1,000, 1,500. I'm going to have to buy a lot of them. Not that I mind, but I'm going to get a lot of them. But yeah, it's somewhere around there. So these points here for these army options are between 5, 10, 15 points.
Right. But we should say we were having a blast at 750.
We were. I think you could have a great game at 750. I think 1,000 is a great size.
And 750, our game was our game went about an hour.
Yeah,
and that's still learning the rules.
Still learning the rules. But these
it's a fast, fun game, but deep.
Yeah, and these little army options are just a great way to fill those little points you're missing in. And there's a bunch of little things. We don't need to cover them all. They're the same for every army, but you can do little tricks, and until you understand the mechanics of the game, these won't make a lot of sense. But they're just ways to get a little filler in there and help you, like better morale checks, things like that. All right. So I think it's time now, Craig. We've talked about the fluff. We've talked about the armies.
Yeah, why don't we talk about how this game plays?
Time to talk about how this game plays. So let's get into the mechanics. Now, it's, as Craig and Rick mentioned earlier, this is based on the Bolt Action mechanics, which is a World War II game by Warlord Games. That's the foundation. So if you're familiar with that game, some of this will sound very familiar to you. But if you're not, and a lot of us miniature gamers may not be, because it's more of a historical game, this is going to sound a little different. It's different than most other miniature war games in that it is an integrated turn sequence, so that Craig will move a unit, then I'll move a unit, and then Craig will move a unit, and we'll go back and forth. However,
it is not really that.
Not really that at all. A unit will activate, and then another unit will activate. Whose unit it is kind of random.
It is completely random.
And here's how it works. So when you come to the table to play, after you figure out the scenario you're going to play and set up all your terrain like you do in every miniature war game, you're not only going to come with all your units, but you're going to come with some special D6 dice, right? One for every unit in your army, at least, and maybe there's some other stuff, but generally that's the basic rules. And my dice are going to be different colored than Craig's. And these are not normal dice, okay? These are D6s, but they have words written on each side instead of pips. So it'll say, one side will say advance, one side will say fire, one side will say ambush, one side will say down, one side will say run. Those are all the different orders you can give your units. You're also going to need a handy-dandy bag, okay? That's opaque. And we're going to take all of Craig's dice, throw them in the bag. We're going to take all of my dice and throw them in the bag for my units. So my dice are gray, Craig's dice are green. We shake them all up. And at the start of the turn, actually for deployment, it works the same way. For deployment, you pull a die out of the bag. If it's my color, I deploy a unit. If it's Craig's color, he deploys a unit. And we do that back and forth till everybody's deployed, throw the dice back in the bag, and now we're ready to start playing. And on turn 1, same thing. I reach into the bag, pull out a die. If it's my color, I pick one of my units that does not have a die next to it yet. I pick the side of the die I want to give as an order for my unit. So if I wanted to advance, I pick the advanced side up. I put it next to my unit to show they're advancing. And then I do the unit's full order. And then we go back to the bag and pull another die out. So if you're following along at home, you're realizing that if I've got 5 dice in the bag and Craig's got 5 dice in the bag, it's possible that I could pull all 5 of my dice and Craig doesn't even get a die out until I activate a whole army.
That would really stink.
It's unlikely, but it could happen. Or Craig could get 1, I could get 1, or Craig could get 2 and I could get 1, or we don't know. It's totally random. Now, this is where unit count matters, because if I come to the game with 4 units and Craig comes to the game with 7 units, which in Concord versus Gar is actually pretty common, I am outdiced 7-4. So we pull the dice out. Craig is more likely to be able to go first.
Right.
But what's great about this is there's a cool reaction mechanic. We'll get to it in a minute that helps mitigate some of that what can be frustrating if you're waiting for your dice to come out. But
I think would totally mitigate it.
Yeah. So but let's talk about the dice. All right.
Yep.
So and the orders.
Yeah.
So we pull a die out, right, Craig?
Yes.
And there are 6 different orders because it's a 6-sided die.
Yep.
Let's say we want to give an advanced order. How does that work?
Advance, your unit can move up to its regular move, which for most models is 5 inches, and then shoot. And you're shooting. Your stats are all target numbers based on a D10, and you're looking for that number or lower. So it's very simple. Your accuracy is how good you are at shooting. And so you're going to shoot. You don't get any bonuses for advancing. So you move 5 inches, and then you roll however many D10s your unit tells you to. And if some weapons have rapid fire, so they shoot more than 1 die or whatever. But you're going to shoot. You're looking for your accuracy rating or lower, and there are many modifiers for that, depending on range and technology and cover. And you're shooting, and that's it. That's your advance order. So you're moving and shooting.
Yep. And the next order is fire. You could choose to do. It's basically like aiming. So you're going to give up movement and just shoot.
Yep.
Adds +1 to your accuracy. And as Craig mentioned, what's nice about this game is it's a D10 system, and all your stats are on a scale of 1 to 10.
Yeah.
And you have a stat for every major thing you want to do. So if you want to shoot, use your accuracy stat. And as Craig mentioned, you're going to want to roll equal to or under your accuracy stat. So the higher stat, the better. So with fire, when you're using a fire command order, you're going to get +1 to your accuracy stats. So if my accuracy is normally a 5, I would need to roll a 5 or less on a D10. But if I use the fire order, I now need to roll a 6 or less. So I got my odds better, right? And there are modifiers in the game to make things harder for that. All right. Then there's the ambush order, which is really pretty select. This is the how the game handles what some of the games call Overwatch, right? I can put the ambush order down, and it will allow me to react in a more broad sense of ways to react than normally. And we'll get to reacting in a minute. But ambushing is basically like being able to shoot whenever I see anybody move, essentially.
Right. Yep.
Then there's the down order, which is not normally an order you want to voluntarily give, but you can do it when you need to, which is your unit basically hits the dirt. The advantage, you don't do anything. You just hit the dirt. The good news is that anybody shooting at you has to reroll all hits.
Right.
So it makes you hard to hit.
Much harder to hit.
But down generally happens to you when you don't want it. So when you fail morale tests and other things, your unit will go down, basically the hunkering down and cowering.
And there's a lot of negatives to it.
And last but certainly not least is the run order, Craig. How does the run order work?
Run, you're moving double your move, so most models are going to move 10. And there's no randomization. You're moving 10 inches. You can do nothing else. If you are a human model or other infantry model, actually there's a lot of models that can do it and only a few that can't. The Gar suits happen to be one of those that can't. You can opt to sprint when you're running, which means you're moving 3 times your movement rate. So you can move 15 inches.
Yeah.
But if you do that, you have to make an agility test or you're exhausted. You take a pin, which we'll explain pins later. Pins are kind of a very cool mechanic within the game. And they're leveraged in a lot of different ways so that they kind of represent a few different things. One of them can be your guys just getting exhausted and they're winded because they just ran.
Yep.
So so you don't have to do that if you just move double, but if you move triple, you have to do that. But a cool side benefit to running triple, anybody shooting at you has to re-roll hits again because it's harder to hit you because you're moving fast.
We actually did that wrong.
No?
That only happens while they're running. So that it's sprinting. So it only actually happens if you're ambushing, or if you're doing point blank fire in an assault.
Oh,
but
okay.
but if
you've
sprinted, so that's a little side rule there. But it's actually very clearly written in the rules, which is good. But yeah, so run's awesome because you move triple speed. Well, you can move double speed, so everybody can do that. Large models can't sprint, so the GAR can't sprint.
Yeah.
Well, their big guys can't sprint. But other guys can sprint. But there's a cool mechanic where if you fail your sprint check, you get pinned, which I love. We'll get more pinning later. So that's essentially the core of the turn.
Right.
Then what happens is, and then we'll keep going. So Craig's going to take an order out of the dice out of the bag. It's Craig's. He puts it next to a unit. He advances. He shoots at me. Boom, it's done. My turn. We reach in the bag again. Maybe it's Craig's turn again. Maybe it's my turn. We keep going until all the dice are out of the bag.
Yep. Now a couple of those army options that we mentioned earlier will actually help you sort of shape whose die is coming out of the bag or when that happens. So there are cool strategic ways for you to kind of try to get the edge.
Exactly. Now at the end of the turn, you're going to remove the dice from the table and put it, because remember, you're putting a die next to each unit.
Yep.
And at the end of the turn, you're going to remove the dice from the table and put them back into the bag. However, there are a couple of orders where you don't get to do that for free or automatically. So first of all, if your unit is down, they don't automatically just go, stand up.
Back up.
They might be cowering when they're down.
Yeah.
So you got to make a command check. And your command check, again, is a stat. It's called command, and it's a number 1 through 10. It seems to hover around 7 or 8 for the GAR and the Concorde. But it's -1 for every pin marker that's currently on your unit. More about how you get pins later, but one of them could be you're running too fast and you're exhausted and you just need to take a break for a minute. So I'm going to rest. So you get a pin on there. You're going to roll that, and you're going to hopefully get equal to or under it. If you do, you can remove the down marker or the down die, and of course you also lose a pin, which is interesting. Yeah. However, if you fail that roll, you will stay down. And that die will not go back in the bag. It will stay next to the unit. So you're going to be down a die from the bag next turn, and that unit... By the way, to react, more about that later, but to react when your opponent's doing something, you can't have a die next to your unit.
Right.
So if your unit has a die next to it, it can't get a new order this turn because it's locked down. Its die is not in the bag right now, so it's reducing your probability of dice coming out of the bag, and you can't react. So being stuck down for another turn is generally bad, unless you're just hosed and you want to make them reroll misses.
Now, the good news is, even if you fail, you take a pin off, unless you roll a 10.
Yep.
In which case, you're really done. You're staying down, and you don't get to take a pin off.
Yeah, so there's 2 cool rules in the game. There's the rule of 1 and the rule of 10. So whenever you roll a rule of 1 on a D10, something good extra happens to whatever you're trying to do. So, for example, if you're trying to get rid of your down order and you roll a 1, when you super succeed, so not only do you remove the down die and you remove a pin, as Craig mentioned, you have to remove an extra pin if you had it on your unit because you're really, really rallied up. If you roll a 10... something really bad happens, and in this case, you would not remove a pin at all, and you'd still stay down.
Yeah.
So there's always something like that, and it happens too in shooting and everything else. So remember, when you're playing this game and you see yourself roll a 1 or roll a 10, you should check the rules because there's something cool or bad supposed to happen, basically. All right, so that's the basic turn. That's really most of it. But we got to get into, I'd like to get a little more detail.
Little nitty-gritty.
Yeah, let's get into the shooting a little more detail. Let's get into hand-to-hand combat, and let's really get into the pins and the reactions, which is really where I think the innovative mechanics are hiding in this one, Craig.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that whole dice pulling thing is innovative, although it's been done before in bolt action, but I think it really comes to its own in a great way this game, too. Okay, let's talk about shooting.
Yep.
So it's pretty straightforward in this game, Craig. I found it to be really pretty simple, which I like.
Yeah, I've been enjoying it because it's so straightforward.
Yeah, so there are modifiers. Some games will try to move away from that, not these guys, which is good.
That's a weird thing because a lot of games have moved completely away from modifiers to try to make it more like just easier to figure out like what you're trying to shoot. This game is kind of hearkening back. I see a lot of 40K 3rd edition in this game before people shied away from modifiers and weapons being different and ranges having an effect on you and stuff like that. So
there's a whole list of modifiers to hit, and we'll go through all those. But line of sight's pretty simple. So it's kind, as we talked to Rick earlier, it's kind of true line of sight when you're trying to get elevation, but generally it's not. Generally, you're just looking from the top down. You're drawing a line from center of model to center of model, And everything's pretty much unit to unit for the most part. So actual range is just closest model unit to closest model unit. If whatever their range is, you can assume the whole unit has that range.
Yeah.
Everything's unit to unit in this game, meaning that there's no. Well, I think I just said that. So anyway, moving on. Cover. Pretty much, if you're shooting through cover, there's a modifier. You can see through one blob of light cover. There's two types of cover. There's light and heavy. If you're seeing through light cover, or dense, I think they call it, 2 parts of light color completely block your line of sight. 1 part just gives you -1. If your unit is in cover, this is the part that's a little confusing. If your unit's in cover, then it doesn't affect your chance to hit. It increases their resistance save, which is basically the equivalent of an armor save from other games.
Right.
So that's one thing that's kind of tricky to remember. Once you get that down, it's simple, but you got to get it down.
Yeah.
Blocking line of sight is very simple too. Units block line of sight to units. So
You're
you
right.
can't trace line of sight between bases of models. Units block line of sight to units. The exception to this is that large units can be seen over and can see over smaller units.
Mm-hmm.
So the GAR can't be screened by regular sized models, for example.
Yeah.
Really, that's pretty much it. That's most of it. So you're just going to measure, and you can't pre-measure in this game either. So you're going to declare your shot.
No pre-measuring.
Then you're going to check range. There are 3 major range columns for each weapon. There's, I think they call it short, long, and extreme, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, short is no modifiers, long is -1, extreme is -2 to hit.
Yeah.
You're going to roll those dice to hit, so you're trying to get under your accuracy rating with modifiers. And then I'm going to get some numbers of hits on Craig's unit. Now, the unit receiving the shots, so Craig's unit, that owner of that unit can allocate how the shots go. The wounds go to his models.
Right.
However, he's got to allocate them evenly. But if I roll a lucky 1, remember on those D10s, every lucky 1 I roll, I get to pick who gets allocated.
Right.
All right.
But still has to be everybody gets one before somebody gets another.
But generally you get 1 or 2 hits. I'm like, 1 lucky hit's going to be on.
That's how you can pick out the special weapon guy.
Or the leader.
In this game, you actually want to avoid the leader of the unit.
So all the leaders get a reroll on their armor save. So you generally want your leader to be shot. So your leader's always leading from the front and everything else, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Now, the one thing to remember, though, is after shooting's over, you take, as long as there was at least 1 hit, there's a couple rules about this, but as long as there's at least 1 hit, you're going to take a pin marker for being shot at.
Correct.
Okay? Even if no one got hurt, even if no one got wounded. Now, one other thing to remember, though, is that there's a rule about that, though. There's something called heavy armor. Heavy armor is any armor with an armor value that's over 10 with a resistance roll over 10 after modifiers. Okay? So a resistance roll of higher than 10 means I got to roll a 10 or less to not be hurt. So it sounds like I can't be killed, except that roll of 10 always fails, right?
Yeah.
So the GAR, for example, their resistance roll is a 12. So if you shoot the GAR with a weapon, now every weapon has something called a strike value, and that strike value subtracts from the resistance roll. It's like a minus to the armor save, right?
Yeah.
So Craig's got weapons that have strike. He can rapid fire his guns for 2 shots a guy, but their strike value is only -1. So when those shoot the GAR armor, my armor is resistance 12. So that'll mean I need to roll an 11, which means they're heavy armor, which means that he doesn't cause pinning.
Unless you take a casualty.
Unless I take a casualty, right.
Right.
What he needs to do is, to cause pinning without the strike value, without me losing a model, he needs to have a strike value that gets me down to 10 or less.
Right.
So now he's got a tough choice. He can shoot more powerful setting of his guns. I still need to roll a 10 to lose a guy, but he can definitely cause a pin if he hits me. Or he can shoot with more volume and hope I roll more unlucky 10s, but I won't be pinned. So it's a really tough call there about that. And I really like that as well. So it's a pretty neat mechanic. What do you think about that, Craig?
I think it's a really cool mechanic, and I'm still not sure I'm doing it right, math-wise.
Yeah.
I don't, because you can separate out your guys and have some do one and some do the other and try to play the math. And I'm just right now, I'm shooting all of my guys on high power, so they each get a single die. And as long as I hit one of those, you're taking a pin.
Right.
And my entire strategy with the GAR right now is all about pins. And if I do a casualty, that's a happy bonus.
Right. So pins, we'll talk about them now real quick. So pins are, the majority of the time, pins come from shooting.
Yeah.
Thus the name, you're getting pinned down, right? And every time you take a pin marker, the first thing to remember is it immediately affects your unit's capabilities, because a pin marker is a -1 to 3 key stats.
Yeah.
It's a -1 to your accuracy, so you're now less effective shooting back. It's a -1 to your initiative, which is the number you need to roll for reacting to another order. And it's a -1 to your command, which is the number you need to make to be able to get rid of a down marker and do other cool things. So that immediately makes your unit less effective. You're less accurate in shooting. You're less likely to be able to react to someone charging you or something, and you're less likely to make good command rolls. That's huge. The other problem is when your pins get higher than the number of models in the unit, you got to start making break checks, which increase your pin count and make you go down more frequently, which is bad. And if the number of pins on a unit ever equals the unit's command value, the unit is destroyed. They basically rout. So that's bad too. So you can kill a unit without ever actually damaging a guy. Essentially, you can remove them from the board. And that's one way to get the GAR, for sure, because they're a low model count unit. There's only 3 of them. So it's very easy to get more pins than there are guys. And all of a sudden, they're making morale checks a lot to get an extra pins a turn. And all of a sudden, before you know it, they've got 8 pins on them, and they've got 8 command, and they're gone.
Right, which we haven't been doing right either, because if you're below half and you fail, you actually break automatically.
Oh, there you go. So
yeah, we did that right the first game, and then the second 2 games.
Forgot. Right. So that's really pretty awesome. The pins
that means there are options for you, even when you're facing the monstrous Gar who have ridiculously, they're like tanks moving down the street towards you. There are still options for you, even with just your anti-infantry weaponry.
Yeah, the Gar are neat because they seem unstoppable, but they're very challenging to play. They ride easy. But yeah, the pin
very low model count.
The pin mechanic is awesome, and you really are playing to pin almost more than you're playing to kill. Even from my side, because when I'm the Gar and his guys are soft and chewy, I really want that pin on there, because if I get a pin on him, and the other thing to remember is when you go to, we didn't mention this earlier, when you go to put a die on your unit. So let's say Craig wants to go ahead and give one of his units a run order or a fire order.
Yeah.
It's automatic if there's no pins on the unit. If there's even one pin on the unit, you have to make a command check to receive the order you're given.
Yeah. And remember that every pin is a -1 to your command.
If you fail that order check, you go down instead of getting the order you wanted.
Yep.
So that is huge. So just by getting one, so Craig's got a unit of 10 guys, and I've got 3 shots on them, and I can't possibly kill them all with my Gar, but they're near the objective, and I got to stop them somehow. Even just getting a pin or 2 on them gives me a long shot chance of them failing the order next turn and getting stuck down there for a turn, and then me getting in there and really shutting them down. And then remember, once they've failed that order and gone down, they got to roll again at the end of the turn to get back up again to get the down marker off of them. And so I might be able to shoot them some more and put more pins on them, which makes it harder to recover from being down. So I can basically suppress the heck out of them to they get away. So this game really, this mechanic, the pins combined with, and this is unique to Antares. So Rick was explaining to us the pin modifiers to your stats works in Antares because of the D10 system, which bolt action doesn't have. So in that I think that detail really is the innovative mechanic that makes this game really, really interesting to me, because it makes suppression really work the way you think it should.
It's right out of Epic.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not the intention is right out of where the more fire you put on an enemy unit, the more it's going to degrade them, and the less likely it's going to do what the player wants it to do when needed. And last night when Russ and I played, I took one Hail Mary shot by a drone all the way across the board at one unit of heavy weapon Gar. Didn't do anything but put a pin on them, and because that pin was on them, they tried to go on ambush, which would have completely ended my game. They failed, they went down, they were trapped for 2 turns. These guys were hunkering down behind this little bit of building because of that one shot. So that it completely changes the game, because there's always a chance that there's always a reason to shoot.
Yeah.
There's never I'm not going to kill one of those guys, so I might as well not shoot. There's always a reason to put a pin down on that unit and hope for the best.
Yep, that was one scary drone apparently.
That was a crazy shot.
So
crazy
that's shooting.
Shot.
Now, one place these games can get into trouble too is when they go into hand-to-hand combat.
Yeah, especially sci-fi.
Yeah, sci-fi games tend to they get into trouble. And what I like about how Antares handles it is, as we heard from Rick earlier, the combat's not persistent. So we're going to fight in this turn. We might fight more than once, but once it's over, we're going to be separated again, and you're not going to feel locked down, which is something that really bothers me in some games, because you have a super heavy shooty army. It's a problem. Secondly, guns are involved in hand-to-hand combat, which makes a lot of sense in a sci-fi universe as well, and grenades and all kinds of craziness. So it's not a bunch of swords, although I guess it could be. There are some whips. There are some giant power claws. There's all that's happening.
Electro-lash.
Don't get me wrong, which is right out of the Ferengi, by the way. Actually, the Gar kind of look like Ferengi without their suits. But in any case, so hand-to-hand combat. Here we go. So it's pretty basically simple. So there's one other rule in the game which says that you can never end within an inch of another squad. So your when you're moving your units around, they all have to be within an inch of each other.
Friend or enemy.
Yeah. They have to be within an inch of each other, unless they're sharded. Unless there's special rules. But generally speaking, your units got to stay within an inch of each other. And they can't end within an inch of another unit. So it should always be very clear which units are which and how they're separated out. However, when you go for hand-to-hand combat, you declare, I'm going to charge, and you give an order. It's usually the run order. And you're going to give the run order, and you're going to move either 2 times your speed, or you can even sprint into hand-to-hand combat if you want to.
But then you got to take that test, and that means if you fail, you're starting the combat as the aggressor with a pin.
Yeah, but now here's some bonuses for that, though. Here's where your bonus helps you, Craig. So there's also
that's right.
point-blank range shooting happening now. So what happens is that the charger and the chargee both shoot at each other at what's called point-blank range. Generally just means you fire your primary weapons at each other. If the charger sprinted, here's that spot that Craig was mentioning before where the defender has to reroll his hits. So that's the good news for the charger, but he's got to make an exhaustion check. It might be pinned, which means his accuracy would be -1 and his hand-to-hand combat will be, hurt too. So that's bad. But, and that's generally simultaneous with a couple exceptions. So for example, if you're charging a down unit, the down unit's point-blank fire happens after the charging unit's point-blank fire. So by getting a unit down before you charge them, now you've got a chance to kill a few of them before they shoot you, which is good. Or pin them to reduce their accuracy, which is good. But in any case, that both happens. You both shoot that. What's kind of neat about this is some units have weapons that are only point-blank weapons. For example, I missed this the first time I played with Craig. My GAR assault units have...
Oh, look who's got his little models up on the Facebook page.
Oh, yeah.
I recognize those.
I put them at the time. But my assault units have grenade launchers on them that are only used in point-blank assaults. And they fire grenades out, which is great. And so that all happens. You roll your point-blank shots. That shooting mechanic is exactly the same as regular shooting. Nothing fancy there. And then you go to hand-to-hand combat. The mechanics here are very similar to shooting, but instead of rolling accuracy, you're rolling your strength check, right? Yeah. So, but it's the rolls the same mechanics. So the attacker, and it's all simultaneous unless the defender is down again. So you're going to roll your attack rolls. You're trying to get under your strength. And then the defender, again, rolls his resistance roll, same as against shooting. There's a strike value on hand-to-hand combat weapons. Yeah. And so if there's not, then you don't have one. You roll, you check that, and if you die, you die. But here, from hand-to-hand combat, you only take pins from casualties, not from actually just swinging the weapons. So you got actually 1 pin per casualty.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about this is then, after that little scenario, so we've charged, point-blank fire happens, simultaneous hand-to-hand combat happens generally, then you check for the winner. The winner is the unit with the fewest pins. Mm-hmm. So this is interesting. It doesn't matter where those pins came from or when those pins hit you. Those pins could have been on you before I charged. I could be charging it with 4 pins on it. That means I got a
perfect sense.
Really good chance of winning the combat, right? No matter how it goes.
Yep.
Or if I'm charging in and I get a few pins on you from point blank shooting, and then I kill 2 guys, which gives you 2 more pins. I got 4 pins on you. Now the defender might get some pins on me. I might charge you with pins on me, which means I'm going to go in with a deficit, right? So it's kind of cool. You just look up the total pins.
You might be exhausted from sprinting into combat.
So here's the deal: if there's the winner, the guy with the more pins, the loser makes a break test. And a break test, again, is just a command check minus your pins.
Which can be huge.
If you fail, the unit's destroyed. Boom, gone. That's it.
Yep.
If you succeed, the winner then can decide to continue. So the winner gets 1 more chance to do it all again.
Yep.
There's point-blank fire again, too, right, Craig? Or is it just hand-to-hand combat? I can't remember.
I think it's just
hand-to-hand combat. But the winner can do 1 more round of combat. If there's a tie... So if neither side has more pins than the other, there's no break check, but the commander, both sides can agree to continue or not agree to continue. So basically you smack talk each other into agreeing to continue or not. If you don't continue for whatever reason, you do what's called consolidate, which basically means I think the winner moves first and the loser moves. And again, if there's a tie, you randomize who moves first.
Yeah, and it's just 1 more round of hand-to-hand.
There you go, perfect. So no point.
When you charge, you get +1 strength when you're trying to hit.
Yep.
When you do the follow-on combat, the person who won, whether they charged or not, gets the +1 strength.
Cool, that's nice.
Yeah.
So that's hand-to-hand combat. That's shooting. That's the game. We've even talked about how pins worked.
Yeah.
There's some of the cool stuff in there. Like I like how most blast weapons, for example, don't use templates. They just roll a D number of wounds when they hit you. So you roll to hit once and it hits D4 models or something in the unit. There are indirect fire weapons with templates, though. There is what they call overhead fire, which is basically indirect fire. All those mechanics are in the game. Everything else. But, we should talk a little bit about reactions real quick. Because
reactions are huge, as we noted at the beginning of the review.
We forget about this more times.
The time.
And it's so about halfway through all 3 games I played now with Craig. Yeah. I'm like, I should have reacted earlier. So here's the thing with the reactions, that when a unit takes an order that's targeting you, so when you give an order to a unit, you must declare another unit you're doing something to, right? So if it's running, no. But if you're charging, you declare, I'm going to charge that unit of Russ's Gar, or I'm going to shoot that unit of Russ's shoot. When you declare that action, then your opponent can choose to react. But his or her reaction options are limited to the order you gave, okay? Based on the order you gave. And remember, I cannot have an order on the unit that's reacting right now. So if I already have if I have a die on my unit, so there's a good reason to shoot the units that already have dice on them, because you're not going to spark a reaction. All right. So here's what's going to happen. If you get shot at from either an advance or a fire order, you can choose to go down.
Yeah.
And this is the only reaction that doesn't require a test. You can automatically go down. No test required. You go down.
Yeah. Because remember, they have to re-roll hits if you're down.
So there's a good reason if you're in trouble, or you like where you are on the board, or you're just trying to sit there and absorb fire. Or there's some tactical reasons where it makes sense. Rarely, but it's there. Go down. Any other reaction requires you make a test against your initiative. Yep. So everybody's got their own initiative stat. And again, this is affected by your pins. So watch your initiative stat. So when I'm assaulted by a run, I can either stand and shoot, which basically means in point blank I go first.
Yep.
Or
It's exactly what it means.
Or I can attempt to escape.
Yeah, because it doesn't mean you get to shoot and then shoot again in point blank. It means instead of point blank happening simultaneously, you get to shoot first.
Exactly. Or I can escape. Now, escape's interesting. So before anybody measures, remember, there's no pre-measuring, Craig says, I'm going to charge that unit of guard. I'm like, well, I'm going to escape. So I get to move my guys one double movement.
Yep.
And then Craig measures his assault. If he still gets to me, the assault happens. There it is. And I also don't get to stand and shoot because I'm busy running.
Right.
I don't get the point blank fire. If I got away, though, then Craig runs, but he doesn't get to me, and the assault has failed, which is kind of cool. So I can fall back.
Mm-hmm.
If I get shot at, now here's the interesting. If you use a fire order against me, which remember is the aim and shoot order.
Yep.
If you use a fire order against me, the distance you are from me affects the kind of reactions I can do, right?
Yep.
I can either do if we're close, within 20 inches, I can do a fire order, which basically means we're going to have a firefight. So you're going to shoot at me, and I'm going to shoot at you. It's going to be simultaneous. We're just going to shoot guns at each other.
And both of you get the +1 bonus.
No, I don't think the defender gets the +1 bonus.
Yes, they do.
Do they? Wow, okay.
They do. It's a fire order in all ways.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll look it up later. All right.
Trust me.
But then the other option you can do is if it's over 20 inches, you dash to cover. And I did use this against Craig a couple times, which was kind of fun. So this one is
annoying.
If you're firing me from over 20 inches, I can make a move, and as long as at least some of my models get into cover, I'm okay. And you can also run out of line of sight. So what was cool about this was we didn't go into some of these mechanics, but there's all kinds of cool special rules for different units. And one of the special rules command units can have is a rule called follow. And if you have a follow rule, it means when you give an order die to that unit, you can give the same order to all units within 5 inches of them, if you want.
Firefight is a fire unit, a fire order, so you get the +1.
Read the next little sentence.
I do. You're thinking of the
there's one that doesn't give you the +1.
The stand and shoot.
That's what I'm thinking of.
Stand and shoot counts as a fire order, but you don't get the bonus.
That's the one. Okay, thank you.
Firefight counts as you get the bonus.
All right, cool. So, but if it's over 20 inches, I can run away. I forgot also saying, but there you go. So, that's what happened because Craig was giving this order to multiple units. Because I ran out of line of sight, none of them could see me anywhere. He'd wasted the order, and now he had to decide something else to do with those guys. Now,
I had to shoot. I lost the shot with one unit, and the other 2 units had to shoot somebody else. It was annoying.
Which was kind of cool.
Yeah.
So I like that.
Cool or annoying, depending on what side of the table you're on.
Now, one other thing is if you have the ambush order die down on one of your units, remember we mentioned that earlier, that gives you some other cooler reactions. And basically that gives you a reaction you can do when the enemy walks in front of you. You can basically make an advance order, which is move and shoot, or you can do a fire order, or you can do, that's pretty much it. So you can basically shoot the guys as they come in.
You can stop them as in their movement.
Yeah.
And make a fire order. So again, you get that +1.
Yep. That's pretty much it. Now, what's cool also about the reactions is, and this is something you really want to think about, especially when you're playing the Gar. So the Gar have this interesting special rule where if you're fighting a Gar player, you have to put an extra die in the bag that's a color that doesn't match either army's dice. When this die comes out, it represents the fact that the Gar do some strange things with space and time because of their technology that really distorts the laws of physics. So they're using this really bad technology that really no one uses anymore because it's so awful.
Eddies in the space-time continuum.
Exactly. So when this black die comes out, because Craig is green and I'm gray, when this black die comes out, you draw another die from the bag immediately, and whoever player die that is, they have to take that die and put it next to one of their units and mark them as down, because basically a time disruption happened there and kind of stuck the unit for a bit. Now, of course, generally, because the Gar are generally outnumbered, this is a good thing for the Gar, because generally, since there's more green dice in the bag than gray, it'll probably be Craig's guys to get hurt by this, but it could just easily be mine. It depends what happens. But what I've found is by reacting, because when you react, you reach into you find one of your dice in the bag, you take it out, and you put it on your unit to indicate their reaction order. So by reacting, you're also removing any other order you're going to get this turn. So you're replacing the other order you might give with the reaction order. That's an important point to make, right? Mm-hmm. But you're also pulling dice out of the bag. So if Craig's going first, and I'm going to react, I'm going to get my die out of the bag. I'm going to get some shots on him before maybe he does more damage to the unit. But also, I've removed my die from the bag now, and as a Gar player, that's good for me because now there's still more of Craig's dice in there that can get hurt by the evil black die. So,
right.
All kinds of cool meta stuff happen.
Now, another way around that is a cool thing that we didn't talk about, which is most of your commanders have a special rule called follow, which means when they take an order, they can order 2 additional units within 5 inches of them to do the same order.
Right.
And if you do that, you reach into the bag, you get your dice. And I kept doing that in our second game, forgot it completely in the third game. And that way, for pulling one of my dice out of the bag, I can end up burning 3 of my dice, go with 3 units as long as I want them all to do the same order. Mm-hmm. And they're not going to be in there to be affected by that damn black die.
Right. So there's... and there's
lots of cool stuff.
There's all kinds of cool rules that, and we're going long, so there's all kinds of stuff in here. But there's rules that allow what they call multi-order dice units or mods, and these allow units to have more than one order die in the bag and then placed on them. So some units can take more than one. There's enhancements for some of the Gar suits to do this and other things. So there's really all kinds of cool rules that really add so much more depth to this game. That's really pretty simple. I mean, I know that sounded complicated, everything we described there, but it's really pull a die out of the bag, give yourself an order, shoot at somebody, they can react. That's it, really.
Yeah.
And what really impressed me the most was how quickly, Craig, you and I figured this game out. Right. And really we were looking up specific, weapon rules or unit rules quite a bit because we're learning our armies, but we weren't looking up core mechanics that often, which was pretty cool.
No, I think it's a really tight game. Once you understand the mechanics involved, it's very intuitive. Mm-hmm. And the flow of the game is great. It's in more than once while we were playing, we commented that it feels very cinematic, and you're playing the strategies and the tactics that make sense, not the game rules.
Right, and it really, that's what makes it great. And again, also it comes in the book. We don't have time to go through all these, but there's some great stuff in here. There's 6 sort of balanced competitive missions. You might even call them tournament missions, which look a lot like sort of the tournament missions you expect on other game systems. But then there's also 6 really interesting asymmetric story-driven sort of campaign missions that are also in there just for story and background and fluff material. So they've got good missions for competitive balance play, and we found that. We played one of the competitive missions. We really liked it. Yep. Looking forward to trying the narrative missions. Also, what's great about this, so much rich ideas in here. The terrain section of the book is just chock full. There's rules for buildings.
Anything you could imagine to make terrain.
Any kind of terrain in your collection, there's rules for it in here. Very clear, very easy to understand. I love the terrain rules. I mean, Craig and I commented several times on playing, and Craig's got some really very rich boards with all kinds of cool terrain on them, both jungle, we were in the city, and it was very easy for us in less than a minute to completely define within game rules what everything on the board was. Nothing ever seemed weird or out of place when we were using the terrain. It all just worked. Yeah. So, Craig, we should probably wrap it up here. So
we should.
So, in the style of a new human.
Oh.
So new humans. You might want to just define a new human real quick. But in the style of a new human, please describe the patent-pending D6G rating system.
All right. Well,
I should
with
call it-
your limited intellect,
Yes.
you are not tapped into the integrated machine intelligence as I am. I live in the nanosphere. I am evolved beyond you, and thus you can really not understand anything I think or say or do. This is going to be very difficult for me to try to bring these higher concepts down to your standard human level. But so if I am thinking that an action is good or something that is going to be beneficial to the greater concord, I would give it a rating of a lower numerical value, resulting in sort of, let's imagine that we're using, I don't know why you would use a D6. Clearly a D10 is superior, but if you're using a D6, imagine that you're looking for a number and a range of numbers from that number and higher. So the lower the number, the better. The higher the number, the worse. So if you're rating something, let's say a strategy or your feelings towards lesser humans, you might be, so for instance, thinking of another new hue or new human, as you might say, I might say a conversation with another new hue would be a 2+. It's something to seek out, something that will make the universe a richer place for me, whereas trying to speak to you, Russell Wakelin, might be a 6. Something I really don't want to do because I get a headache just trying to think in these smaller circles. And if it's really bad, I might give it a reroll at a 6, which is a reroll, meaning if it's a 6, I have to roll again and get another 6. So basically, think of, and your math is so bad, but think of the number, the lower the better, and a reroll represents a half, which doesn't make any sense mathematically, and you will be not far from as close to the truth as a standard human can be.
Thank you, Mr. New Hugh.
Those new hues are obnoxious.
They are obnoxious, I tell you. So anyway, Craig, you want to go first here on your final thoughts?
Yes, I will go first. I love this game. I think this game harkens back to the 40K that I loved, which was way over a decade and a half ago. It harkens back to Epic. It reminds me of Dust Warfare. In a lot of good ways. I love the pins, the blast markers from Epic. I love the individuality of the units. I love the fact that you're customizing. I mean, I played one game where all my guys were all tricked out, and I had special weapons, and I had buddy drones. And then in my third game against Russ, I wanted another heavy medium weapon drone, so I stripped all of my squads of all of their individuality, and they went in bog standard, as our Australian and New Zealand listeners would say. And I love that you have that granularity in your force building. I think it's great. Just a couple things that kind of make me tilt my head. One of those is the terrain. If you're shooting at me through terrain, it's minuses to hit, but once I'm in the terrain, you have no minuses to hit me, but now my armor is better, and I have to assume that that's a mechanism put in place for balance purposes. And I'm fine with it from an intellectual standpoint. I'm just constantly having to reassess. I love the fact that the terrain is back to where it was in 3rd and 4th edition 40K, where forests can block. I mean, you've got both types of forests. You've got forest template that can block terrain, or forest template that doesn't block terrain unless you've got 2 of them. The slightly abstracted line of sight, I think, works awesome with all of my terrain. Whether you're playing 40K or War Machine or even Dust Warfare or Infinity, you seem to always have these things where, okay, well, we're going to have to agree on something, and what is this going to count as? And the terrain rules for Antares seem so broad that it really is easy to find sort of equivalence in the rule book for everything that we had on the table. So I thought that was fantastic. I do think the pricing is a little off. I think there's a reason for it. I don't think anybody's gouging or by any stretch of the imagination, anything like that. But I think until the plastics come out, this might be a little rich for some people's blood to do an army scale game where a unit of 5 guys is going to cost you $30. I recommend you leverage, your online retailers. War Store has a great selection, for instance. That being said, this is my favorite miniatures game since Dust Warfare, without a doubt, bar none, have no doubt, meaning like, infantry miniatures. I've had a blast with it. I'm enjoying the fluff. I'm enjoying the modeling. I think it is better. All right, I know I am enjoying it more than I have enjoyed 40K since the good old days, way when DACA was in existence. And so that was longer ago than we want to think. But and so it really is filling a niche for me that hasn't been filled in a very long time. And Dust did it for a little while, but Dust made a bunch of mistakes and then completely fell apart. And there's been nothing to fill its plate. I mean, I tried Infinity, these skirmish games, they don't really do the same thing. You're tracking all these different individuals. You don't have these squad. I'm really loving it. So I would say, on a basic a miniatures gamer coming into this is going to like Beyond the Gates of Antares. I think I'm going to say a 3+. And if you are a fan of old 40K or Dust Warfare or Epic, I think it's going to be a +1.
Nice.
So a 2+.
Nice. That is a good rating, sir.
Yeah. I stand by it. I think this is an excellent game.
I'm going to agree with you pretty much across the board. It does bring back a lot of what I liked. I think what makes the game feel most unique is a couple things. The integrated turn system we've seen more and more in space combat games.
Yep.
We haven't seen it as much as I would like in miniature games. And I like it. I like it here a lot. And I also, miniature gaming as a whole, as a hobby, has been really moving and driving towards skirmish. And while skirmish is fun, I miss the army scale. And so it's great to have this back. And you're right, Craig. I love Dust. This Dust Warfare. This has a lot of the Dust Warfare feeling for me. I love the dice. The dice order mechanic, that's brilliant. I know it's been around for a while in bolt action, but for me, it's brand new because I never got to experience it there.
Yeah.
I love that. I like the very simple shooting mechanics. The modifiers do not bother me. And things about to get me excited about miniature games. Okay, I gotta like the miniatures, and I love the miniatures here. I like the Gar a lot. They're orcs and goblins, which is just great for me. I love them. I like the background material. I like the story that's going on here. I like the fact there's a lot of factions to choose from, not just for my friends, but for me as well. If for some reason the play style of always being outnumbered and having all these lumbering suits that really can't get through terrain fast and effectively, and if that gets dull for me, I have 5 other factions to choose from, right, to try something else. So, and the game really, while the game does play okay at 500 points, it's, Craig mentioned earlier, it's really going to sing at 1,000, 1,500 points, and that's the army style game, and I like that. I want a game where I've got artillery. I want a game that I've got vehicles. I want a game that I've got, assaulting elements and cav elements, and they've already got the jet bikes. You've already seen them at Salute and at game shows or trade shows. They're coming. That's all out there. It's happening, and that gives the game that kind of variety. And it's not 1 or 2 models, like whole units, which is just fantastic. So it's got the factions I love. It's got the mechanics I really, really like. To Craig's point, it's got the terrain rules I really, really like. It's fast. It's easy. I think they got a real winner here, and if they can get the other plastics out quick,
yeah,
and they can fulfill their promise on vehicles and get this stuff rolling pretty soon. So by middle of next summer, they'll have all 6 armies already out, but if they've got like 3 or 4 armies that are pretty well supported in plastics with vehicles, this game is going to be huge, I think.
I think so too.
I think it could be very, very big this year. And this will be one of the big games that GW should watch out for, because it's the first game that's trying to hit them with. I mean, I know Mantic's done a little bit of it too, but Mantic's so close to what GW is. I think it's almost too close. It's like you know what I mean? Like, this is
well, I mean,
enough.
they've never their warpath never really took off.
Right.
And then kind of fizzled and puttered out as they almost immediately admitted they needed a second edition. Then they just kickstarted the second edition, and I will be honest, I'm in on that Kickstarter, and I was kind of excited about it. I'm now contemplating, because the pledge manager hasn't come out yet, I'm contemplating shifting my entire pledge to terrain. to use with Beyond the Gates of Antares.
Well, I think what this really gives us is a sci-fi, unit-based, large-scale game that has modern rules.
Right.
Like it doesn't. It's what I don't want to go back to 40K third edition because I still remember the challenges with it. But,
absolutely.
But what I love, but I wanted someone to take what was fun in third edition and make it modern.
Yeah.
And that's what this is. This is the modern version of that. And no one's really done that. They've either taken 40K to a place that's where it is now and people love it. That's cool, but it's not my game. Or they've tried to go back to what it was, which I think kind of where Mantic was going. I like this where they're saying, it's like the D&D 5e of sci-fi army scale games, for lack of a better way to describe it. So I really like it. I'm going to give it a similar rating, Craig. I think if you're a miniature war gamer in general, there's a lot to like here. And I think an average miniature war gamer will like this game on a 3+. Mm-hmm. If you are a fan of Dust Warfare and miss it, add +1. And I would only say it's a 4+ if you are someone who doesn't like the paint, because you're going to have a large model count here, people. Right. And it's going to be large. There's going to be a lot of model assembly, and posable models are awesome, but some people just like to slap them together. So that's not this game. But if you like that kind of stuff, you like assembling your model and posing them, and you like army scale games, it's a 3+ for you, people. Get out there and try this game.
Yeah, absolutely.
So phew. Craig, that is beyond.
We did it again. I mean, yet another major giant miniatures game.
Just packed into a megasode here, I think.
Yep.
So get there, give it a try. Let us know what you think. Post your pictures on your Twitter feed. Let us know about them. We're having a blast. If you check our Twitter, check our Facebook page, you're seeing all the pictures of Craig's crazy cool terrain and our models and everything, and you can see us playing this thing. We're having an absolute great time with it.
We are.
So happy New Year, everybody, and we'll see you on the other side in 2016.
Ciao. This Jever Notice is brought to you by all of our fine friends over at Patreon, the men and women who help us keep the lights on no matter what's going on. Without them, we really wouldn't be able to do the show. Today I'd like to thank W. David McKenzie, Ian McCreary, Darren Leeds, Brian Emra, and Tony. Did you ever notice how different one person's view of the world can be from another? I mean, that's pretty much a truism, and we're all well aware of that fact. But every now and then it's really brought home. And for me, it was brought home most recently when Karen agreed to come with me and my son to go see Star Wars Episode 7, I almost said The Phantom Menace, The Force Awakens. Now, Karen is not a science fiction fan by any stretch of the imagination, and she is quite the opposite, in fact. And I'm sure longtime listeners will remember different times and places where that has come out. A very early date that we had when she was outrageously mocking the Two Towers movie because trees were talking. Anyway, so she went to see Star Wars with Reese and I, and we had decent seats. I haven't seen Star Wars yet in a theater other than theaters that have provided reserved seating because I don't like waiting in line anymore. So literally I've seen it 3 times so far, and every time I have not waited in a single line except for once where I had to wait for a Diet Coke. Other than that, there hasn't been any waiting at all. So it's been a great experience and a really interesting shift from what it used to be when you went to see a blockbuster movie like this and you would wait in line and fight over seats. And now, of course, the only negative is when you show up at the theater and someone's sitting in your seat. And they tell you when you're up front, they say, if somebody's sitting in your seat, come get us. Don't make a big scene. Well, they don't say that. They make it, they say, it's our job to take care of that, blah, blah, blah. So Karen Reese and I got there a little late, and the movie hadn't started yet, and the previews had just barely begun, so it wasn't that big a deal. And we went, and of course, the 3 seats right in the middle where I had chosen, there was somebody sitting in one of them. And it was a man with his daughter, probably about 10. And then there was an empty seat on the other side of them. So I said, I think you're in our seats. And the guy was like, no, I'm not. And I was like, I think you are. I think we like, and I had the tickets, and I said, we have 1, 2, and 3, or whatever the numbers were. And he was like, nope. And I went, wow, okay. So I turned to Karen and I said, I guess I got to go talk to somebody up front. And she said, no, I'll do it. So I was like, okay. So she went, and I sat down very awkwardly next to the guy who was refusing to admit that he was wrong. And about a minute later, he was like, oh, you know what? I'm sorry. And he had his daughter move. And so I was like, oh, great. Okay. So now I was like, Reese, you stay here. And then I ran out to go get Karen and tell Karen that the guy had moved. And she was like, oh, okay. So that was awkward for the rest of the show. I wasn't sitting next to him at that point. I was sitting next to him after he had his daughter move over. That's right. So I was next to him the whole time. So that was no fun. But then the movie started, and I forgot all about it. I was having a good time, although I will admit that I was being a little aggressive with the armrest, although that's not really easy to do with these giant recliner seats that these theaters have today. So I was sitting there, and we enjoyed it. I love the movie. It keeps getting better and better every time I see it. The lights went up at the end. My son loved it, although during certain parts, my wife reached over and put her hand over his face, and he was like, "What are you doing?" And they had a little conversation, which was awkward for me because I'm like, "You don't talk in the movie theater." And so every time something scary would happen, he would lean over to me and go, "Daddy, I made it through another scary part." So that was funny too. So the movie's over. We all go out, and she was like, "You know what? I didn't mind that. That was a pretty decent movie story as far as movies go." And I was like, "Wow, that's pretty neat." But she said, "But I noticed something about the vocabulary of your movies." And I went, "Okay." She said, "There's 3 words that show up in every one of your movies." And I was like, well, "Okay, I'm intrigued. Where's this going?" She said, "There's always galaxy." I'm like, well, I mean, I think you're remembering Guardians of the Galaxy and Star Wars, but okay. And she said, "There's always a resistance." And I was like, well, it's not always a resistance. Sometimes it's a rebellion. I think what she's remembering is things like Hunger Games. And then she said, "And there's always a Senate." And I was like, I don't know that that's true. And so I started to think, and she started coming up with these examples, and her examples were things like Firefly and the Hunger Games and Guardians of the Galaxy. And I was like, well, it's not always the Senate. She's like, no, but there's always a group of people, and there's always a resistance. There's always somebody fighting some evil that's stronger than everybody else, and the good guys are always like scrubby. And I'm like, well, they're not always scrubby. No, they're almost always, the good guys are scrubby, scrappy fighters. They're like underdogs. And I was like, well, yeah, okay, maybe. And it got me to thinking, like, I mean, I like stories about an underdog. And then I started to think, like, it is kind of true that most of these types of stories revolve around an underdog rising up against some oppressive, and that's a lot to do with, I think there's a lot of dystopian stories out there nowadays, of course, and we could get into all sorts of reasons why that would be. But it was just an intriguing, because those are nothing, I would never have like put all of those things together. And she's been telling everyone who will listen ever since then that, oh, I know all the words that are in Craig's movies. And I want to be like, and I have been, sadly, I haven't been able to think of anything really, really good and gotcha, but like words that are in your movies, like love and relationships and drug use, but that's not as funny. So it got me thinking, and it's always good when you're thinking, but I was very happy to bring my son to the movie, and I was very, very happy and touched that my wife was willing to go with us. So that's about all I've got to talk about that today. So thanks for listening, and good night.
Achievement unlocked! You've made it to the end of another D6 Generation episode, the podcast whose humor has universally been acclaimed as not too horrible. Please let us know what you thought of the show by either emailing us at info@thed6generation.com or by posting in our official D6G episode thread at the top of the DACA Discussions Forum on DACA.com. If for some inexplicable reason you actually enjoyed this show, you can help others find out about it by leaving positive reviews on iTunes. See you in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening, and happy gaming.
The theme from Total Fangirl comes from the soundtrack of The Last Night on Earth, the zombie game, courtesy of Flying Frog Productions, and is a composition of Mary Beth Magalanes.
Can you see me?
We can. We don't normally use video because it consumes that valuable bandwidth that we...
Yeah, I know. I usually just turn it off once we get going.
Okay, good. But you look great. Quite a collection of books behind you there, sir.
Yeah, well, I'm down in my living room, you see, and this is just in front of the just the bookshelf. So yeah,
it's very impressive.
It is.
Do you know they're mostly just really old books. You know, these are just the ones that have come down over the years. You know, it goes on a bit as well. I mean, really, I've got a library upstairs, but there's also
oh wow.
Yeah, so it's but Lindsay, my wife, is an editor, so she's had a lifelong passion for books, and she's in fact, if you look at a lot of the books on these shelves, you'll see there's 2 copies of everything, or 3 copies in some cases, because we over the years we both bought the same books, often in the same editions.
Nice. And you can't bring yourself to pare the collection down to one copy each.
Well, yeah, we ought to. I'm just looking at it. There's actually at least 3 copies of Dune, 2 in the same edition, and then another edition that's obviously been bought later. Oh, there's a 3rd edition. Great.
Well, clearly you were meant to be.
I think so, yeah.
That's excellent.
It's nice to have a little bit of empirical evidence that you're so compatible.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? And on top, I don't know if you can see on top, there's all the teddy bear collection.
Oh, lovely.
Well, say all of, a small fraction of the truth be known. Yeah.
The public face of the teddy bear collection.
Right.
I know. You'd think there'd be some toy soldiers about, wouldn't you? But no.